This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 71, Kurukshetra A Dramatic Interlude. Last episode, we finished the 13th day of the 18-day war at Kurukshetra. On that unlucky day, Arjuna's heroic son Abhimanyu was treacherously separated from his comrades and ambushed by a group of 6 Kauravas. This tale included the moving scene in which Abhimanyu, disarmed and on foot, resorted to a broken chariot wheel as his only weapon. This image lasts only a moment before his tormentors blasted even that from his hands. Earlier, when Arjun was not fully committed to the fight, we saw 2 similar incidents in which Krishna ran on foot to attack Bhishma. On the first of these scenes, Krishna was bearing his Sudarshana chakra, while the second time he went unarmed. On both occasions, he was stopped by Arjun and resumed his role as charioteer and advisor. I commented at the time that the scene did not occur as we all remember it. We have the beautiful image of Arjun clinging to Krishna's leg while Krishna brandishes a chariot wheel and Bhishma stands ready to embrace his doom. I mentioned at the time that this beautiful image did not match either of these scenes. But now that we have this third incident, with Krishna's nephew bearing the broken wheel, the image begins to make more sense. I believe this painting, and our own recollections, are a composite of all 3 incidents. Arjun clings to Krishna in the first 2 of these scenes, while Krishna goes unarmed in the second, and Abhimanyu introduces the chariot wheel, which obviously reflects the image of Krishna and his Sudarshana chakra. Thus, almost miraculously, the painting conveys the combined meaning of all 3 scenes. Magically, it calls to mind of many of the most powerful images from this war: Arjuna's reluctance to fight, Bhishma's resignation, Krishna's neutral role in the fight, and finally, Abhimanyu's tragic final stand. It is amazing that a single image can convey so much feeling in a single glance, but this genius pulled it off. There is also a mysterious correlation between the Great War and a Vedic sacrifice. As far as I can tell, the relationship is never explicitly explained, but the comparisons are unmistakable. While the Vedas appear to mark a transition away from the blood sacrifice of animals, the Battle of Kurukshetra seems to be a mass human sacrifice, with Krishna as its officiating priest. Western Christianity is suffused with the theme of the substitute sacrifice. We first see it in the story of Abraham, in which God directs him to sacrifice his only son on an altar. Abraham obeys, ties the boy up, but at the last minute, God substitutes a ram, and the beast is killed in Isaac's place. The theme crops up again in the story of Moses in Egypt. When the Pharaoh refuses to let the Jews leave, God sends down the spirit of death, who takes the life of every man's firstborn son. Only the Jews are spared, because they sacrificed a goat and poured the blood on their doors. The theme reaches its climax with the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus is the Lamb of God, the Son of Man, and God's only begotten Son. By his death, all of humanity is saved. Christians never adopted the ritual of animal sacrifice because they believed the sacrifice to end all sacrifices had already occurred, so they simply memorialized that event by drinking the blood and eating the flesh of the Lamb of God. Is it possible that the Great War of Kurukshetra served a similar purpose in Vedic India? Perhaps Vedic sacrifice included blood sacrifice up to the time of this war. But following the spectacular blood offering of India's best and brightest warriors, maybe the gods were sated and no longer required the blood of living creatures. But meanwhile, as the battle still rages, it seems that each side is required to make greater and greater blood sacrifices in order to win. The Kauravas sent an entire army to its doom as the price of removing Arjun from the battle for just a few days. The power of this offering is such that Arjun cannot resist it. He must leave to kill these men, leaving his brother unprotected. It appears to me that, in order to save himself and his cause, Yudhishthira was forced to make an even greater sacrifice. He offered up the life of his own heir. We already know that it is Arjun's grandson Parikshit who inherits the throne, so regardless of the ultimate fate of Draupadi's 5 sons, we can be sure that Abhimanyu was the one born to wear the crown. We get further confirmation that Abhimanyu was indeed destined to be the heir to Hastinapur from the stories Vyasa told to comfort Yudhishthira. The main theme of each of these stories is the death of a king's son and heir. We have heard one of these stories already, about the king who lost his firstborn son, and the story Narada told him to comfort him. Vyasa's storytelling is not over with yet. His story of the birth of Lady Death only whetted Yudhishthira's appetite, and the king asked for more stories. Vyasa obliged with the story of another king named Srinjaya. The story begins when Srinjaya only had one child, a daughter. Srinjaya was a good king and was friends with the sages Narada and Parvat. One time they were hanging out together, and Sanjaya's daughter introduced herself. Both sages admired the girl, and when they discovered she was unmarried, Narada asked to marry her. Sanjaya readily consented, but then Parvat got angry, saying, "I saw her first. You have stolen her from me, and for that I will not allow you to go to heaven." Narada replied, "I asked first, and her father consented. But nothing is certain until the actual wedding takes place. Thus, you complain about something that hasn't happened yet, and for that you will not reach heaven until I say so." Oddly, that is the last we hear of angry Parvat in this story. What happened next is that Narada blessed his friend Sanjaya with a son. The sage even allowed the king to design the boy himself. At first, Sanjaya was conventional in his request. He specified that his son be well-bred and a good warrior. But then it occurred to him that Narada had not placed any limits on him, so he got creative. He said, "Oh, and I want my son to crap gold nuggets. And if he barfs, let him barf gold. And he should also piss gold." Narada was true to his promise, and Sanjaya's son was called Gold Spitter. The boy became something of a Midas, and soon the king's palace was covered in gold. Unfortunately, some bumbling thieves heard of this boy, so they kidnapped him. Thinking he must have a belly full of gold, they cut the boy open. Of course, they only succeeded in killing the Gold Spitter. As for King Sanjaya, he was crushed with grief. Narada tried to comfort the king by telling him about the greatest kings in all history. Narada gave a brief biographical sketch of each king, but then pointed out how each of them had eventually died. He concluded saying that if these, the greatest and best of kings, must die, then what could you expect for this boy? These sketches go on for about 50 pages, but finally Sanjaya understood. Narada asked him, "Then is there anything else I can do for you?" Sanjaya said, "No, your words have given me comfort." Narada replied, "Very well, then I give you back your son. I raise him from the dark of hell, anointed like a lamb at the sacrificial altar." Vyasa explained to Yudhishthira that the boy had been killed before he had won armor, conceived a child, or officiated at a sacrifice, so his life was incomplete. Abhimanyu, on the other hand, was a mighty warrior who killed thousands before he was honorably struck down. The boy had accomplished his life's purpose and lived a complete life. Now he has taken his place in paradise, and there was no need for him to come back. By now Yudhishthira was feeling a lot better. He thanked Vyasa, and the old sage disappeared. But once the sage was gone, Yudhishthira said, "Oh crap, what am I going to tell Arjun?" The scene now changes. Arjun is returning from war in his chariot, driven by Krishna. That day he had finished off the last of the suicide squad that had been sent to distract him, and he was feeling rather triumphant. As he rode into camp, he was expecting some celebration at his accomplishment, but there was only silence. In the distance, he could hear the Kauravas celebrating. All of this seemed strange. He asked Krishna what was amiss, but Krishna said it couldn't be anything important. But as they drew closer, it became obvious that something terrible must have happened. Arjun recalled that Drona had used the wheel formation that day, and it suddenly struck him. He said, "Only you and I and my son know the key to breaking that formation, but I never taught Abhimanyu the secret for getting out again. Don't tell me they sent the boy unprotected to go to his death." Filled with anxiety, Arjun jumped down and ran the rest of the way to his brother's tent. They were all there to greet him, each with looks of despair on their faces. Arjuna asked, "Why has my son not come out to greet me? Don't tell me he was killed. Who would be crazy enough to kill this boy, who is Krishna's favorite, the grandson of Indra, and my own son?" Krishna put his hand on Arjun's shoulder and said, "Don't do this to yourself. Every warrior accepts the risk of death in battle. You know that your son now resides in the blessed realms, the place where every warrior yearns to go, and the reason we face death in battle. Do not mourn, because this is the way of things. Here are your brothers and friends. All rely on you. Let your sorrow go." Arjun calmed down a bit, but now he wanted to hear from the guys who were supposed to have protected the boy. Addressing the generals of his army, Arjun asked, "So how is it that you guys are all standing here unharmed, bows and swords intact, while my boy is dead? Was the boy fighting Indra? How did this happen? Were you all just standing around while they dragged him down and murdered him? Had I known you guys could not protect him, I would have looked after him myself, but I trusted you. Are all these weapons and armor just decorations?" Ashamed, the Pandavas all looked away, unable to meet Arjun's gaze. Finally, Yudhishthira spoke. He said, "After you left, Drona tried to capture me. The only person who could break his assault was your son, so we asked him to undo Drona's formation. Abhimanyu was fantastically successful in his mission. He did things we thought no mortal was capable of. We stayed close behind him, But then Jayadratha made a pact with Shiva and was able to hold us all back, while Drona, Kripa, Karna, Ashwatthaman, Kausalya, and Kritavarman surrounded him. Still, the boy fought valiantly, but it was too much. Dushasan struck the fatal blow, but by then his fate was sealed. Arjun listened to this, weeping quietly. Then, menacingly, he said, "I swear to you all that tomorrow I shall kill Jayadratha. Unless he comes to me begging for mercy, tomorrow he shall die. If I do not kill Jayadratha tomorrow, then may I reside in hell for eternity." Standing tall, his Gandhava bow in hand, Arjun made a vow. He said, "If tomorrow the sun sets and that devil yet lives, I shall throw myself into the fire." As he swore this oath, he rapped his bow on the earth 3 times, and the sound rang all the way to heaven. Almost as soon as these words left his mouth, spies raced over to the Kaurava camp with this exciting news. Jayadratha heard of Arjun's oath and nearly crapped his pants. He rushed to Duryodhana and begged permission to leave and go back home behind his walled city. But Duryodhana saw a great opportunity in this challenge. If he could just preserve Jayadratha's life for 1 more day, they could take Arjun out of commission. Duryodhana reassured Jayadratha, while Drona, Kripa, and Karna all promised to protect him, at all costs. They gathered together and made plans to place Jayadratha in the very center of the army and to surround him with all of their very best fighters. News of this made its way just as rapidly back to the Pandava camp, where Krishna castigated his friend. He said, "You really should have checked with me first. The Kauravas know all about your oath, and they're going to make it next to impossible for you to get at Jayadratha, at least for the day." Arjun scoffed at this. He said, "Let me tell you about these so-called champions who think they can protect Jayadratha. Their combined strength is not worth half of mine. You watch what happens tomorrow. That man is as good as dead." But despite Arjuna's assurances, neither of them could sleep that night. Dark omens and portents were seen, but no one could tell which side they threatened. Finally, Arjun sent Krishna to see Subhadra to try to comfort her. It is not clear where these women folk were kept during the fighting. I had the impression that the non-combatants had been left behind at Virata's city of Upaplavya. But wherever she was, Krishna strolled over to his sister's palace to console her. You can imagine the melodramatic scene as Krishna tried to comfort his sister, who had just lost her only son. At first, she was inconsolable and blamed her brother and husband for failing to protect her child. But gradually, Krishna was able to bring her around, and she eventually came to terms with her loss. She accepted that death is a natural part of life, and her boy now resided in paradise, his earthly duties having been disposed of. Abhimanyu's bereft mother continued to weep and wail, and the night was nearly past. So finally Krishna got up and said, "Now seize your mourning, Subhadra. Abhimanyu has gone the way of the very greatest of warriors, and I can only hope the rest of his kin may follow in his glorious footsteps." With those words, he left Draupadi to comfort his sister. Krishna did not go to sleep, nor did he return to Arjun. Instead, he located an auspicious patch of ground nearby and consecrated it for a ritual. He laid out fresh grass, fragrant flowers, and dried grains. Meanwhile, Krishna's priests began a rite of propitiation to Shiva. Arjun emerged from his tent, was anointed, and joined his friend for the ritual. The ritual succeeded in raising Arjun's spirits, and by the end, he embraced Krishna, and the two at last turned in to get some sleep. Lying in his tent, Krishna still could not sleep. He worried about Arjuna's hasty oath, and how he might live on should Arjun fail to fulfill his promise. Speaking to his own charioteer, Dwaraka, he said, "The great Pandava has set himself a difficult task. What will Yudhishthira do should he fail?" As for Arjun, he slept, but fitfully. In his sleep, he dreamt that Krishna came to visit. Arjun greeted him and confided his worries to his friend. Arjun said, "Keshava, my promise to kill Jayadratha was not made lightly. But now Duryodhana will bury him deep behind their 11 legions of warriors. I seriously wonder whether I will even catch a glimpse of that vile king. But if my promise is not kept, how can a man like me still live?" The dreamed Krishna said, "O son of Pritha, there is a weapon called the arrow of the beast lord. If you have that, you can expect to kill Jayadratha. I suggest you concentrate your mind on Shiva and request this weapon from him." Arjun did as he was told, and the pair of them had an out-of-body experience. Their spirit bodies rose up into the air, and they began to fly rapidly northward beyond the Himalayas. They then flew up into the heavens to the top of a mountain peak, where they met the great god Shiva with his consort Parvati. Krishna bowed to Shiva, and the god greeted them warmly. Not deceived by their current disguise, Shiva recognized them as the divine ascetics Nar Narayan. Shiva said, "I know what you have come for, so be at peace. Nearby is a pool of nectar where long ago I left a magic bow and arrow." They went to the pond, prayed to Shiva, and from the pond emerged Rudra's bow and arrow. From Shiva's side emerged a man clothed all in white. This man taught Arjun the secrets of this weapon, then he flung it back into the lake. The bard concluded, "So it was that Arjun received for the second time the Pashupata, a weapon so deadly and divine that it would make good the hardy warrior's promise." The pair then bowed and thanked Shiva for his help, and then the dream ended. While Arjun slept, Krishna stayed up all night talking with his charioteer. The poet paints a fascinating scene of the Pandava camp at daybreak on the 14th day of battle. He says the watchmen clapped and chanted the hour, and poets sent up praises to the king. Then a choir began singing as dancers joined in. Then came the rumble of kettle drums and the blare of horns. All this racket roused Yudhishthira the king from his slumber. The well-rested king went to his bathhouse, where 108 young slaves helped him in his ablutions. Having bathed in perfume-scented waters, he donned a loose-fitting turban, the color of flamingo feathers, faced the rising sun, and chanted a Vedic hymn. Following this, he made a brief offering to the sacred fire, and then greeted a crowd of priests who stood waiting to greet him. Pandu's son joined with them in their Vedic chanting, and then handed out gold, robes, cattle, and horses to these priests. Next, the king donned his fanciest robes and took up his seat in a royal pavilion. A young paladin rode up in his war chariot, dismounted, kneeled, and announced the arrival of Krishna. Casually, as if the war could wait indefinitely, Yudhishthira had cushions laid out for his guest and welcomed him warmly. Before they could speak, the rest of the Pandava generals arrived, including his allies, brothers, and sons. All, that is, except Arjun. Addressing Krishna, Yudhishthira said, "O Lord of all that is, in you lies our hope for the future. Please assure us that Arjun's promise shall come to pass as it must." Krishna answered, "Not even a god could accomplish what Dhananjaya can do. I will clear the way so he can burn through the ranks of the Kauravas. Today, Arjun's arrows will send Abhimanyu's vile murderer to his death. If even Indra and his army tried to stop him, they too would go down before him." Finally, Arjun himself arrived, anxious to talk to his brother. He described to them his dream of the night before. The Pandavas were astonished at this tale, and they all bowed down and gave thanks to Shiva for his grace. They were all pretty charged up to hear that Arjun had a secret weapon to help him discharge his oath, and they grew anxious to get back to the fight. Yudhishthira adjourned his court, and everyone made haste to prepare for the day's fighting. I imagine you are also getting anxious to see the end of this conflict, so we'll end it now and begin the tale of the 14th day next time. The story of Arjuna's vow ends with one final detail. It says, as they rode out to battle that morning, a multitude of good omens could be seen in the sky and wind and clouds. Feeling good about this, Arjuna appointed Satyaki to protect the king while he finished with his mission to kill Jayadratha. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 72, Killing Alambusha. Last time, we took a brief hiatus from the war. The news and reaction to Abhimanyu's death had everyone worked up, and so the drama went on all night as they alternately mourned the boy's death and plotted revenge. One might wonder, with all the culprits involved in the ambush of Abhimanyu, why did Arjun choose Jayadratha as the one to blame? We might have thought that the kid who killed him, Dushasan's son, or at least the grown-ups who plotted and carried out the ambush, Drona and Karna, would have been the focus of Arjun's ire. But instead, Arjun seemed to put all the blame on Jayadratha, the one guy who wasn't even there when Abhimanyu was killed. This would seem to be a good question, but I think it leaves out the mechanics of the conflict, which the author takes great care in maintaining. Basically, I believe there are two necessities in this war. First, the Pandavas must beat the Kauravas, but only by a little bit. Secondly, every feud must be settled correctly. On this first point, this means that every loss on the Kaurava side must be met by similar but slightly lesser loss on the Pandava side. Thus, if you're keeping score, the Kauravas seem to win once for every 2 days that the Pandavas come out ahead. The Kauravas sacrificed Bhishma and the Trigartas, and in return, they earned the capture of Yudhishthira. To avoid capture, the Pandavas gave up their heir to the throne, Abhimanyu. In order to survive the Kauravas' continued sacrifices of men and heroes, the Pandavas will be required to trade in more of their sons in exchange. Thus it seems Abhimanyu's life is a necessary contribution in the economy of this increasingly gruesome exchange. The other incontrovertible rule in this war is that each of the Pandavas has a specific score to settle with each of the Kauravas. Back when the war started, the Pandavas partitioned out who would kill whom. Going back to the Odes of the Dice game and even further back to the birth of Drishtadyumna, certain characters on the Kaurava side have been earmarked for one or another Pandava's revenge. For example, Duryodhana and his brothers all belong to Bhim. No one else may kill them. Drona is specifically targeted by Drishtadyumna, and we know that Karna and Arjun are destined for a final showdown. Thus, when Arjun was looking for someone to get revenge on, he had to cross certain names off his list. These guys have already made their appointments with destiny. Among the perpetrators, this only left him to choose from Dushasan or Jayadratha. An uncle killing his nephew seems a bit unheroic, so it is much better for him to take out his ire on his odious kinsman Jayadratha. Besides, I imagine the Pandavas have been waiting a long time to kill this malicious little man. If you recall, Yudhishthira made his brothers spare his life because they were related by marriage. Now that they have divine sanction to kill their own blood relations, it is a perfect opportunity to settle an old score with the wretched King Jayadratha. Before Sanjay began his description of the 14th day of the war, King Dhritarashtra interrupted him and began once again to lament his bad fortune and the doomed fate of his sons. As he often did in the past, he blamed his rotten son and the cruelty of fate. Sanjay was having none of it. He heard the old man out and then castigated his master for his self-deception. He said, "Your Majesty, your lamentations are pointless. If you had forbidden the dice game, or had sued for peace, or had at least reined in your sons, none of this would have come to pass. Despite your deep wisdom, you broke forever what binds the world, and let Duryodhana, Karna, and Shakuni pull it apart. Now, listen if you can to the story of your own downfall." With these words, Sanjay resumed his narration of the battle. It seems that, while the Pandavas experienced a very emotional night, the Kauravas also felt a wide swing of emotions. At first, they felt triumphant over the fall of Abhimanyu. Then they began to fear what Arjun might do in retaliation. News of Arjun's oath gave them fresh hope that maybe they had landed on a final solution to their problems. But as day broke and both sides prepared for battle, they once again began to fear what kind of retribution would be brought down on them. Of course, Jayadratha was crapping his pants with anxiety. To pacify him somewhat, Drona assigned Karna, Ashwatthaman, Shalya, and Kripa, along with 100 companies of horse, 6 legions of chariot fighters, 14,000 elephants, and 21,000 men-at-arms. This vast bodyguard was directed to withdraw behind the main army to protect Jayadratha at all cost. Drona arrayed the rest of the army in the shape of an arum lily, or what we call an Easter lily. The shape of this white flower is that of a single petal that wraps around the long yellow stamen. Thus, Jayadratha's guard was at the bulb at the very base of the lily, and Arjun would have to somehow traverse the entire enemy force just to get a glimpse of his prey. The heavenly observers felt that in normal circumstances, this glorious array would be sufficient to conquer the whole world. But despite this, the Kauravas kept noticing evil omens. They tried to ignore these dark thoughts, but still terror welled up in their hearts. I suppose the Pandavas assumed a more conventional formation because we are only told that Arjun took up his position at the very front of the army. Then he and Krishna both gave a mighty blast on their conches, and the Kauravas felt their hair stand on end, while their horses and elephants all pissed and shat themselves in one foul-smelling explosion. But there was no time for a change of underwear, because Arjun charged against his opponents, followed by the rest of his army, all baying for blood. Arjun hit his enemies with an explosion of severed body parts, blood, and gore. Dushasan led a herd of elephants against him, but soon the animals were all killed by Arjun's arrows, and the Kaurava fled the field. Having broken through the first line, Arjun now came across Drona and his personal guard. Before attacking, Arjun stopped his chariot and bowed to his teacher. He said, "O holy Brahmin, I ask your leave to cross your line. I entreat you to look on me as your own son. So, with your leave, allow me to pass, so I may put the king of sin to death." Perhaps because of Drona's caste, he was not nearly as gallant as Bhishma had been toward his worthy foe. Drona merely said, "Jayadratha will not be yours unless you take him from me." Then he laughed and showered Arjun with the cruel rain of arrows. Arjun defended himself, but concentrated his attack on Drona's supporters. As he liquidated Drona's force, Drona continued to attack. First he cut Arjun's bowstring, and then hit him square in the chest with an arrow. Krishna could see that this was turning into a major distraction, so he warned his friend, "Partha, time's a-wasting. Forget about Drona, and let's return to the job at hand." As Arjun turned to leave, Drona shot him a few more times and complained, "What's this? You turn your back on an opponent who still lives?" Arjun called back, "O master, you are not my opponent. I am your disciple. Consider me your son. I know of no one who can beat you." Arjun then rode off to fight with others, while Drona tried to pursue him and draw him back into the fight. Meanwhile, Arjun was fighting with the kings Kritavarman and Shruta. We have not heard much of Shruta, but now we are told that this otherwise unremarkable king had a secret weapon. It turns out that Shruta was the son of the river goddess Parnas and the god Varuna. Out of concern for her son's safety, Parnas begged the boy's father to give him some kind of protection. Varuna gave the boy a magic cudgel, which would render him invincible. There was only one caveat. His father warned him never to use it against an unarmed man, lest the blow bounce back on him. I guess old Shruta forgot this warning because, stupidly, as he rode past Arjun's chariot, he struck Krishna on the shoulder. As you might expect, the cudgel rebounded back at Varuna's son and killed him. Arjun did not pause for a second. He just pressed on with his fight with the Kambojas. A pair of these heroes got in a couple of lucky blows, however. One of them hit Arjun with the heavy spear, while simultaneously the other hit him with an arrow. Arjun lost his senses at the blow and dropped to one knee. The Kauravas all cheered and deluged him in arrows. Krishna nearly swooned out of sympathetic feelings for his friend, but then, out of the cloud of arrows, Arjun suddenly sprang back as if bounced out of Yama's realm. Standing straight, Arjun launched Indra's thunderbolt. The explosion killed his tormentors along with hundreds of others who happened to be standing in the vicinity. Arjun then moved on and proceeded to decimate the army of the Angas. Meanwhile, Duryodhana watched the front half of his formation in shambles and began to worry that Arjun might in fact reach his objective before sunset. He rode up to Drona and complained, saying, "None of us ever dreamed that Arjun would break past you so easily, and yet here you are, standing around, scratching your bum. Why is it that my army no longer serves me? I'm aware that you would like nothing better than to see their side win, but I just can't figure you out. I have provided you with a fine life of comfort and riches, and I have loved you like a father, but despite my devotions, you hate me in return. You plot with them even as you take food at my table. It was at your assurances that I did not allow Jayadratha to run for home. I promised him he would be protected, but now he looks doomed to die. I beg you, protect the king of Sind." Drona replied, "You will not provoke me. You are as dear to me as my son. Now let me speak plainly. Krishna is a great charioteer, and the speed of his horses is such that old men like me cannot keep up. But recall that I swore to take Yudhishthira captive. Arjuna's great speed has taken him far from his companions. Now he stands alone in our midst, and his brother stands unprotected. My mission is at the front, and Arjun is not my concern. You're no slouch at warfare either, so while I capture their king, why don't you go fight Arjun? I'm confident you can do it." Duryodhana said, "Wait a minute. You taught me everything I know, but still you cannot stop him. So how do you expect me to beat him?" Drona then produced a magic suit of golden armor and said, "Put this on, and it will withstand anything Arjun can throw at you. Now go out there and kick some butt." As the Brahmin blessed the suit of armor, he explained that this same armor had once been a gift from Brahma to the god Indra. The spell had been passed on from sage to sage until finally Drona learned of it. Why he did not give this to Bhishma back when he needed it is not explained. While Duryodhana rode off to confront Arjun, the action followed Drona's assault to the Pandavas' main body. A fierce fight then broke out as Drishtadyumna and Satyaki both defended Yudhishthira from Drona's grasp. After much struggle, Drishtadyumna was pushed aside, but then the duel with Satyaki reached epic proportions. At one point, Drona was nearly beat, but he saved himself by launching a magic arrow of fire. Satyaki knew this trick, however, and in return he fired off an arrow of water. The two struck in mid-flight, dousing the whole field in a thick fog. Meanwhile, the sun was approaching the western horizon, and Arjun was not anywhere near his object. In addition, the horses were quite exhausted. Arjun said, "The horses are tired and wounded, and Jayadratha is still a ways off. One thing is certain, the horses must be unyoked and allowed to rest, so I will hold back the horde while you mind the horses." Krishna agreed, and they stopped the chariot and Arjun climbed down. Their enemies could not believe their luck. Arjun had willingly surrendered his mobility while surrounded by his foes. Despite their tactical advantage, Arjun held them all off as Krishna tended to the horses. Krishna observed that the horses really needed a drink of water. Arjun nodded, then struck the earth with an arrow. What appeared was a clear, peaceful pond, complete with lotus flowers, turtles, and fish. Even the sage Narada took a seat at its shores to enjoy the waters. Drawing on his bottomless quiver, Arjun used the arrows to build a nice wooden corral for the horses, including a roof to shelter them from the sun. Even Krishna was impressed with this. Being most skilled in all matters concerning livestock, he comforted the horses and healed them of the worst of their wounds. Meanwhile, Arjun, on foot and armed only with his bow and arrows, was able to fend off the attacks of all of his enemies combined. Everyone was mightily impressed with that. Sanjay said, despite themselves, the Kauravas were mesmerized by the pair's courage. Has there ever been a spectacle as strange as Partha and Govinda stabling their horses on the battlefield? All we could do was blink our eyes in astonishment. As casually as if sheltered peacefully in his own palace walls, Krishna finished up with the horses, yoked them back to the chariot, and the pair resumed their positions on the cart. Duryodhana yelled at his generals, "We must stop them and be quick about it. They will soon reach Jayadratha if we don't do something." We are told that the spectacle made a different impression on the Kaurava allies, however. They all realized that the outcome of this conflict was preordained, and they were screwed. Few of them held out any hope that Jayadratha would live to see the next day. But then the Kaurava army seemed to open up and make way for a giant of a man, clad from head to toe in golden armor. Arjun found himself facing his cousin. Duryodhana laughed then, saying, "Arjun, if Pandu is indeed your father, let's see what you've got. Use all your magic and strength, Krishna too, and let's see what you're made of." The Kaurava accompanied those words with a rain of arrows that bit into Arjun's flesh, knocked Krishna's whip to the ground, and struck their horses. Arjun returned fire with 14 arrows of his own, but they all bounced harmlessly off Duryodhana's armor. Krishna asked, "What's the matter? Are you sending love letters to your cousin? I thought your arrows were unstoppable." Arjun seemed a bit annoyed at this. He replied, "This is Drona's work. He has clad Duryodhana in armor made by Brahma himself. Not even Indra's thunderbolt could penetrate that. But why are you pretending not to know this? None of this could transpire without your knowledge. Duryodhana is cocky, but he doesn't know what to do with himself. He just stands there showing off his armor like a girl with a new dress. But even that armor has its limitations." Arjun then endowed his arrows with an especially powerful mantra and sent them flying at his cousin's armor. But before they could do their damage, Drona's son Ashwatthaman shot them out of the sky. This was too bad, because the potency of Arjun's spell was such that he could not safely use it twice. As for Duryodhana, when he saw those charged arrows deflected harmlessly, he thought himself immortal and did a little victory jig while his supporters cheered him on. But not everything could be protected by this armor, so Arjun took another approach. Carefully aiming each arrow, he beheaded his cousin's horses, shattered his bow, and then dismantled his chariot. Finally, he struck Duryodhana's unprotected hands. The rest of the Kauravas soon realized that their prince was not nearly so safe as they had assumed, so they rushed in to engulf Arjun and protect their leader. Meanwhile, Drona stuck to his own mission to kidnap the Pandava king. He broke past Satyaki and dueled directly with Yudhishthira. The Dharmaraja managed to get in a few good blows, but old Drona shattered his chariot from beneath him. Yudhishthira struggled from the wreckage, pushing aside his dead horses and driver, then looked up and saw Drona rushing at him, ready to pull him up into his own chariot. But just then Sahadev came speeding by and snatched his brother from Drona's grasp. Drona had missed his chance, because now Satyaki was sowing chaos among his own people, so he was forced to break off and attend to that. Elsewhere, Bhima found himself under magical attack by Rishyashringa's demonic son, Alambusha. At first, he fought fairly, but when Bhima got him into a headlock, the demon told him that Baka had been his brother. See episode 9. This means Hidimba must have been his sister, and Gatotkacha his nephew. Before Bhima could react to this revelation, Alambusha turned into a bee and flew off. The demon did not let off his attack, however. He just stepped it up with a burst of magic spells. The demon was causing tremendous damage, and Bhima could not lay hands on him, so Gatotkacha joined in to help his father out. Being equally magical, the demonic uncle and nephew were well matched. The pair fought with magic, with weapons, and hand-to-hand. They fought in the air and on the ground. Although Gatotkacha struggled with this foe, he was helped out by his Pandava relations, who kept up a steady volley of arrows. Finally, Alambusha was weakened enough that Bhim's son got a good hold on him. Finding a large stone, he smashed Alambusha's head into it, shattering it and killing him in a single blow. The foul Nightwalker was dead. Amidst the cheering of soldiers at the death of this scary demon, Yudhishthira heard a different sound. He heard the sound of Arjun and Krishna's conchas being blown. He found the sound of that to be deeply disturbing. He had the premonition that the two Krishnas must be in trouble. Suddenly worried, he summoned Satyaki and asked him to fight his way through and help Arjun with whatever trouble he was in. Satyaki first tried to reassure Yudhishthira, but the worry became contagious. Yudhishthira assured him that as long as Drishtadyumna was around, they need not worry for the king's safety. Now convinced, Satyaki set out to find his lost kinsman on the other side of the battlefield. He crashed into the enemy lines and was soon swallowed up by the vast horde. With Satyaki away, things began to go badly for the Pandavas. They were repeatedly beaten back by Drona and his cronies, and still there was no word from either Satyaki or Arjun. The Pandavas and Panchalis fought desperately to hold things together, and Yudhishthira's fear became more intense. He became frantic when he once again heard the blow of a familiar conch. It was the Panchanjanya, Krishna's conch, now sounding by itself. Yudhishthira heard an urgency to this sound and took it to mean that Arjun had fallen in battle, and now Krishna was fighting alone and surrounded. The Dharmaraja summoned Bhima. Bhima tried to reassure his brother that nothing could go wrong with Krishna on their side, but the fear was contagious. Once again, both of them heard Krishna's solo horn blowing urgently. That was enough for the impetuous Bhimasena. He mounted a fresh chariot and headed off to break through the Kaurava line and rescue his brother and kinsman. That's all for now. I've tried to keep a day's fighting to at least one episode, but day 14 is the longest day of the war. In addition, Vyasa has left us with the most perfect cliffhanger. Next time, we'll find out the fates of Bhima, Satyaki, and the rescue mission for Krishna and Arjun. Will Jayadratha be killed by sunset? Find out next time. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 73, Killing Jayadratha. Last time, we began, but did not finish, day 14 of the Great War. So far, I've tried with some success to compress at least one full day of battle into each episode, but there was just too much going on the 14th day for me to do that. As you'll see later, this is justified in part by the fact that day 14 was indeed an exceptionally long day. I also had a good excuse for ending halfway through the day, because our author gave us an ancient cliffhanger right in the middle of the day's action. We see Arjun and Krishna head off alone into the distant edge of the enemy's territory, and Yudhishthira becomes progressively more worried about his brother's condition. As they rode off to war that morning, they observed omens of great deeds and great tragedy, but no one could say for sure which side would suffer this tragedy. So, as the day wore on, Yudhishthira's doubts and worries grew to a fever pitch. When he heard first the conches of Krishna and Arjun from across the field, and then heard only Krishna's conch, sounding alone, he lost his nerve. Worried about the well-being of his brother, Yudhishthira ordered his best pinch hitter, Satyaki, to search for and rescue his kinsman. Satyaki crashed through the enemy lines and began making the long slog across the battlefield. Unfortunately for Yudhishthira, all he could see was his cousin getting swallowed up by the mass of enemy fighters. So after a while, he began to second-guess his decision to send Satyaki off like that alone. Plagued by doubts, the king decided to send Bhima after both Satyaki and Arjun, and for him to holler when he finds them. Thus, we left off with Yudhishthira having sent away his three most powerful protectors, and now very vulnerable to attack, and we still do not know the fate of Arjun, Krishna, or Satyaki. Fortunately, Sanjay has divine sight, so he's able to fill us in at least on what Satyaki was able to accomplish up to that point. Krishna's cousin was indeed quite busy. Satyaki broke past Drona relatively easily, and found himself confronting Duryodhana in his magic armor. The pair fought for a while, but Satyaki used a similar trick as had Arjun. Discovering he could not harm the Kaurava directly, he killed his horses and driver and honor guard and destroyed his chariot, forcing the prince to flee the battle. From there, he fought Drona, but Drona was still interested in capturing Yudhishthira, so he didn't stick around to fight long. Following this, Satyaki killed the prince of the Kambojas, named Sudakshana, and then vanquished the Kamboja army, and then he went on to vanquish the Yavana army. This is as far as he got when Yudhishthira decided to send in Bhima to find him. Naturally, Bhima was reluctant to leave his brother unprotected, but when Yudhishthira told him that he'd heard Krishna blowing his horn urgently, it was enough for the impulsive Pandava. When Bhima charged the Kaurava line with the purpose of breaking through, Drona was there to stop him. To get his attention, he struck Bhima with an arrow in the forehead. Drona had expected Bhima to have shown him the same courtesy as Arjun had before, so he's annoyed at Bhima's belligerence. He called out, "You shall not pass without first vanquishing me. Arjun and Krishna got through only because I gave them permission, but you can just forget about it." Bhima replied, "Arjun goes where he pleases and does not wait on permission from anyone. You may have been our guru, and we always showed you due respect, but now you no longer behave as our guru, but rather as our enemy, and so I shall treat you as our enemy." With that, he lobbed his mace at the Brahmin, forcing old Drona to jump out of the way as it smashed his chariot to pieces. Bhima then exploded with violence, killing thousands of his enemies as he penetrated their lines. While Satyaki had been forced to fight his way through, Bhima had so terrified and demoralized his foes that they mostly just got out of his way. It wasn't long before he caught up with Satyaki, and not long after that, the pair of them joined up with Krishna and Arjun, who were both quite alright and still in the fight. As promised, Bhim let out a powerful yell of joy when he caught sight of his brother Arjun. The sound made its way unmistakably to Yudhishthira's ears, and the whole Pandava army blew their horns in delight. Duryodhana did not fail to notice that now he had the combined force of Arjun, Bhima, and Satyaki, all intent on killing Jayadratha. This turn of events changed the whole strategy for the day. The Kaurava rode over to Drona to complain. He said, "Arjun is about to track down Jayadratha, and now he has reinforcements. I keep hearing complaints among the rank and file that you let all 3 of these warriors get past you in succession. It seems that I'm fated to never catch a lucky break in this battle. But what's done is done, and now we need to deal with it. What do you suggest we do next?" Drona couldn't help making a slight jab back at his master. He said, "You seem to have had pretty good luck at the dice game, but now that the dice are arrows and the stake is King Jayadratha, your luck is running out. While we have 3 enemy chariots in our rear, we still have thousands more at our front. So I shall stay here to fend them off, while you take reinforcements to protect Jayadratha at all costs. The outcome of this battle depends on it." Karna was among the reinforcements to go after the 3 in the rear, so soon he and Bhima were facing off man to man. An epic battle ensued as the pair battered each other to pulp. Ultimately, and to Duryodhana's surprise, Bhima got the upper hand and managed to knock Karna from his chariot. Shocked and worried about his friend, Duryodhana sent his brother Durjaya to protect Karna. Durjaya went eagerly to confront his cousin, but this was a huge mistake. Sending his brother against Bhima was like sending him a Christmas present. Bhima happily killed one more Dhritarashtra. By then, Karna had a fresh chariot and was back in the fight, but once again, he was dismounted by his foe. This time, Duryodhana sent off another brother, Durmukha, to bring Karna a fresh ride. But Bhima wasn't someone to let go such an opportunity, so while Karna got his new car, Bhima got a new victim. Karna's eyes nearly popped out in frustration, anger, and guilt, but already he was struck by Bhima's arrows, some of which cut right through his body and hit the earth on the other side. Karna returned the favor, cutting Bhima up badly, but ultimately it was Karna who could not stand the heat, and while Bhima bled profusely, Karna was forced to flee the battle. Bhima held his ground. For some reason, Duryodhana sent 5 more brothers to cover for Karna, and then 6 more after that. Bhima gladly received them and sent them each off to the underworld. Each time Duryodhana lost more brothers, Karna felt compelled to return to the fight to avenge their deaths, but this only continued the cycle. As Karna was again hard-pressed, Duryodhana perversely sent another 7 brothers out to help. Among these 7 was none other than Vikarna, the one Kaurava brother who spoke out against the dice game. But Bhima had sworn an oath, and the opportunity was too good to pass up. He killed all 7 of these Dhritarashtra's. Nevertheless, Bhima grieved bitterly over this cousin's fate. He said, "It is only because of my vow that Vikarna has been slain. I know that he only fought against us because it was his dharma to do so, but that he had always had our interests at heart." As for Arjun, he saw all of this activity, and it only made him more worried. If all their best fighters were here, then who was protecting Yudhishthira? Besides, having more allies meant having to protect them instead of going after his quarry. While he couldn't tell how Yudhishthira was doing, it became clear that Satyaki might need some help. Krishna's fighting cousin had gotten himself into a harsh duel with the king Kauravas. The author treats this king with much respect and compliments him for his generosity to Brahmins. He must also have been quite a fighter, because he proved quite a match for Satyaki. At this point, he even got the upper hand. It seems that they charged at each other like in a medieval joust, and Satyaki was knocked right off his chariot. Kauravas jumped down, grabbed the Vrishni by his long hair, unsheathed his sword, and was about to cut Satyaki's head from his shoulders. Krishna brought this to Arjun's attention in the nick of time. At first, Arjun thought little of it. He was impressed at the king's prowess, and this was war after all. But then he considered that it was Krishna who asked for his help, so he fired off a single arrow. This razor-sharp bolt cut right through King Kauravas' sword arm, severing it at the shoulder. This did not kill him, however. In fact, it only seemed to annoy him. Releasing Satyaki with his remaining arm, Kauravas angrily walked up to Arjun and scolded him. He said, "What the hell, man? I wasn't fighting with you. I didn't even see you, but you just cut my arm off. That's not fair. Who taught you to fight like this? Aren't you ashamed?" Arjun replied haughtily, "I think your brain's gone soft with age, old man. I know perfectly well the dharma of war. This is no tournament. We all fight alongside our friends and kinsmen, and you were about to kill my own student, friend, and cousin. Had I stood there and let you kill him and not interfered, that would have been a real sin. On the contrary, you waited until Satyaki was weak from his exertions, and then attacked him while you were well rested. You just wanted his head as a trophy. Really, you should rebuke yourself for not paying attention and letting me cut your arm off. Besides, what would you have done had it been your friend who was in danger?" Old King Burushravas was not mollified, but he was dying, so the time for arguments was over. Still grumbling, he laid out a bed of arrows with his good arm, retrieved his second arm, and prepared to meet death. Krishna then blessed the old king, saying, "You are famous for your constant sacrifices, so go now to the pure regions. May you be born there on Garuda's back." As they watched the old man dying, the Kauravas all grumbled at the unfairness of it. Ignoring all of them, Satyaki drew his own sword and lopped off Burushravas' head. This made the grumblers even more unhappy, but the philosophical among them were not so sure how to judge this. They said, "All that has happened was clearly preordained, so there's no point in getting angry or casting blame. It is anger that caused all of these problems in the first place." Satyaki was annoyed at all these judgmental Kauravas scowling at him. He said, "You guys have no right to complain about this. Where were you when Arjun's child was ambushed? Besides, Burushravas kicked me, and I swore an oath that if anyone touches me with their feet in anger, that I would kill them. So really I had to do it." The sun was nearly setting, so Arjun really had to get back to business. Unfortunately, by now, Karna, Ashwatthaman, Duryodhana, Shalya, and Kripa had all joined together to stop him. Like a relentless tag team, the Kauravas took turns harassing Arjun, playing for time as the sun raced to the western horizon. Growing impatient, Arjun started letting off magical warheads left and right, killing all but the strongest fighters around him. Finally, as the sun's disk touched the horizon, he laid eyes on his objective, Jayadratha. Ignoring all else, Arjun shot the king of Sind with 64 arrows, but he didn't die. It only made him mad. Jayadratha charged furiously at Arjun, and the two traded blows, while the rest of the Kauravas tried to distract him. Krishna shouted over to Arjun, saying, "It's too late, you don't have time for this, but I've got something that will help out." Krishna then drew on his yogic powers and magically darkened the sky and blocked the sun. The Kauravas could barely believe their luck. They made it. The day was over, and Jayadratha was still alive. They all stopped fighting and began to cheer. Krishna said, "Quickly now, cut that head off and make good your vow." Arjun took aim, about to fire, when Krishna interrupted him. He said, "Oh yeah, wait a second." It turns out that before Jayadratha was born, his father had been told that the boy would one day be beheaded in battle. To protect his son, the king became an ascetic and used his powers to curse anyone who beheads Jayadratha. The king said, "Whoever lets the head of Jayadratha touch the earth shall have his own head explode like a melon." Krishna said, "So just keep that in mind." Nodding, Arjun whispered various mantras to his arrow and sent it flying. The arrow cut Jayadratha of Sindh's head from his shoulders, but the head remained attached to the arrow. The arrow then gained elevation and carried its obscene cargo off, beyond the battlefield, and on to the borderlands of Sindh, where Jayadratha's father sat by a campfire, lost in meditation. The arrow flew overhead, dropping its payload on the old man as it went. The old guy was startled, saw what landed in his lap, and stood up quickly, dropping the head on the ground. As expected, Jayadratha's old father recognized the head on the ground, and then his own head exploded. The poet says, "At the sight of this, all beings were filled with wonder, and all of them applauded Vasudeva and the mighty Bibatsu. Only then did Krishna lift the blanket of darkness, and the Kauravas realized they had been beaten. Triumphantly, Krishna let out a blast on his conch, followed by Arjun's and Bhima's. The sound carried across the field and reached the ears of their brother the king, and he and his army celebrated to the sound of drums and horns. Even though the sun had set, the Kauravas were really worked up over having been fooled and having failed to protect the king of Sind. So they forgot all the niceties of war and continued to attack, ignoring the darkness. They fought with a desperate madness. All their strategies and tactics had gone to pieces with Jayadratha's head, so now they just went at it, with no other objective than to kill or be killed. The nighttime, of course, is the best time for Rakshasas, so Bhima's son Ghatotkacha was in his element. He and his son, Anjaparvan, led a group of Rakshasas to fight against Drona and his son Ashwatthaman. It turns out that Ashwatthaman was no slouch when it came to fighting magic with magic. After a tremendous fight, Drona's son killed Ghatotkacha's son. As soon as Anjaparvan died, his father came racing over to get revenge. But Ashwatthaman demurred. He said it wasn't proper for a father to fight the man who killed his son. There was a war going on, so there wasn't much time for explanations. And besides, Ghatotkacha was not going to be reasoned with. Bhim's half-Rakshasa son used all sorts of wizardry against his foe, but Drona's son was able to counter all of his magic and illusion. Ghatotkacha's Rakshasa allies all joined in the fight, but still Ashwatthaman held his ground against all of them. Drona's son held them all back, and then began killing the Rakshasas one by one. When Ghatotkacha's allies were all dead, Ashwatthaman went after him. Fixing a single fierce and straight arrow to his bow, he fired, sending it straight through Ghatotkacha's chest. Bhim's son fell lifeless to the ground. Assuming him dead, Drishtadyumna swept by and carried Bhim's son from the field. Drona and his son continued their assault, still using magic weapons against all comers. It turned out that Yudhishthira knew a few tricks of his own, and each of Drona's magical attacks was repulsed by an equally powerful countermeasure from Yudhishthira. That's all for now. Day 14 has really run out of control. We made it well into the nighttime, but the action has not let up one bit. There's definitely another episode's worth of activity still to come as the night sets in. For one, we still need to find out the fate of Ghatotkacha, but I'll give you a hint. He's not dead yet. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 74, Drona. Last time, we finished up the daylight portion of the 14th day of the war. Arjun finally got close enough to Jayadratha to shoot his head off by sunset, but the fighting continued on into the night. The nighttime is a time for Rakshasas, so Ghatotkacha and his friends were in their element. They did a lot of damage, but they were eventually checked by Ashwatthaman, who killed Ghatotkacha's son and seriously wounded the father. Both Karna and Drona failed spectacularly to live up to their promises, and it resulted in the deaths of about 20 more of Duryodhana's brothers. Duryodhana reacted by applying his own special management style on his generals. He accused Drona of sympathizing with the enemy, and wondered when Karna was going to do all the things he promised before the war began. Now that Jayadratha was dead, the Kauravas needed a new strategy. Summoning Karna, Duryodhana said, "Now I think is a time for you to go in there and do all the things you promised you'd do against our enemies." Karna said, "No problem, turn that frown upside down, because I will bring you victory. I'll beat the Panchalas, Karkeyas, Vrishnis, and all the Pandavas. I'll stick them all with my arrows and deliver to you the world on a platter." Kripa heard these boasts, and he said, "Yeah, right. If you could only fight as well as you can brag, this war would already be over. How many times have we seen you encounter the sons of Pandu, and each time you fled the field? You couldn't even protect Jayadratha after you promised to save him. When Duryodhana was kidnapped by the Gandharvas, you fled. During the cattle raid on Virata, when you had Arjun totally outnumbered, still, you fled the fight. Why should we expect anything different from you now? You roar like a lion when you're out of range of their arrows, but then you go quiet when you're needed the most." Kripa went on, "Your problem is that you keep underestimating your enemy. What you fail to realize is that as long as he has Arjun and Krishna with him, Yudhishthira cannot be defeated, and Krishna and Arjun themselves will never be defeated. Perhaps it is because of your low birth that you cannot see what is so obvious to others." Karna said, "I do not dispute that the Pandavas have many virtues and advantages, but I still have my special weapon that Indra gave me in exchange for my armor, and with that I shall kill Arjun. With Arjun dead, the rest will fall like leaves from a dying tree. But I can see why this is confusing to you, old man. You are blinded by your love of our enemies. But if you continue to praise our enemies and degrade our friends, I shall cut out your tongue myself." These fighting Brahmins are a prickly lot, and Ashwatthaman did not like seeing his fellow Brahmin thus insulted by a half-caste Sutta. He rushed at Karna angrily, and the pair had to be restrained from coming to blows. Duryodhana calmed everyone down, saying, "Quell thy wrath. Our survival depends on us sticking together. If you do not work together, our cause is lost." Everyone calmed down a bit, but Kripa took a parting shot. He said, "We forgive this son of a Sutta, but it shall be Arjun who quells his pride." Perhaps out of love for his master, or respect for his elders, Karna bit his tongue and rode out to confront his enemies. As you would expect from a son of Kunti, Karna hit the Pandavas pretty hard, but it wasn't long before Arjun noticed his attack and rode over to confront him. As the pair approached each other, they sent a constant stream of arrows at one another. When they finally collided, Sanjay described their battle as exceedingly wonderful, like that between two elephants fighting for a she-elephant. But then Arjun got the upper hand. First, he cut Karna's bow in half, killed his horses, and then beheaded his driver. Karna had to jump from his chariot and onto Kripa's and race away. Seeing their champion thus easily defeated, the rest of the Kauravas began to flee as well. Duryodhana, seeing his soldiers being routed, said, "God damn it, all of you turn around, follow me, I'll take care of Arjun myself." I'm not sure about the status of Duryodhana's magic golden armor, but Drona was concerned for his master's safety and sent his son to go in place of the Kaurava. Ashwatthaman tried to restrain Duryodhana, but the Kaurava was not having it. He complained that both Drona and his son were too sympathetic with the enemy, and no one could be trusted but himself. Drona and his son had heard this belly-aching plenty of times already, so Ashwatthaman was naturally annoyed. He said, "It's true that the sons of Pandu are endowed with great might, but that won't stop me. As for you, you are vainglorious and suspicious of everyone. You are wicked and the embodiment of sin. Nevertheless, I am prepared to lay down my life. Now let me at them." Ashwatthaman then rode ahead of the king and proceeded to slaughter the Pandavas. He was only checked by Drishtadyumna's counterattack. By now, it was pitch dark, so both sides had lamps lit, which illuminated the whole field, and the fighting continued on into the night. During one of these crazy nighttime encounters, Sahadev squared off with Karna. Both parties fought valiantly, but Karna was the better fighter. He disarmed the Pandava and had him defenseless, but he withheld the coup de grace. Instead, Karna allowed Sahadev to get away. He called after him, saying, "Next time, don't try fighting with your superiors." Karna had recalled the promise he had made to Kunti and had spared his life. Elsewhere, Sahadev's twin, Nakul, managed to salvage the Madreya's name somewhat by fighting and defeating Shakuni. By the unfathomable logic of this war, Shakuni was defeated, but his life also was spared, although in his case it is not clear why. Duryodhana did not fail to notice that Karna had let his enemy off the hook, so he summoned him and Drona back for another scolding. He said, "I would have never let things go this far if it wasn't for your constant boasting. I only got into this battle because you guys promised that you could defeat them. If you planned on abandoning me, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Like a pair of henpecked husbands, the two warriors did not even try to go over the history of this war. Instead, they just said, "Yes, dear," and went off to fight even harder. The pair smashed furiously into their enemies, scattering the defenders and routing the army. While Yudhishthira scrambled to keep the ranks in order, Arjun suggested that now might be the time for the final showdown with Karna. Krishna did not agree. He said, "O Dhananjaya, there are none who can stop Karna except you and the Rakshasa Ghatotkacha. I do not, however, think the time is right for your final encounter. Remember, Karna still has that blazing dart that was given to him by Indra in exchange for his armor. That missile has your name on it. So let's send Ghatotkacha against him instead." The mere mention of his name was enough to bring Bhima's loyal son into their presence. Ghatotkacha knelt before his uncles respectfully and said, "Here I am, command me." Krishna said, "There's a job that needs to be done, and only you can do it. You shall be the savior of your uncles if you just confront Karna and stop his onslaught." Krishna went on, "It is the duty of children to rescue their elders, both in this life and after. So go now and slay Karna, while the rest of us take care of Drona." Arjun went along, saying, "Yeah, that's right. Only you can beat Karna, so please do us this favor." Loyal Ghatotkacha was game. He said, "No problem. I'll kill them all for you if you'd like." Then he took off to attack Karna. Here things get a little confusing. It says that when it was observed that Karna was fighting Ghatotkacha, a Rakshasa volunteered to help out on the Kaurava side. It was the son of Jatasura, one of Bhima's many Rakshasa victims. This son of Jatasura also happens to be named Alambusha. The previous Alambusha was the son of Rishishringa and was killed back in episode 72. In any case, Ghatotkacha got to kill another Alambusha. This time he cut its head off with his scimitar. Then he resumed his fight with Karna. Sanjay said, "With blood-red eyes, Ghatotkacha was gigantic in stature. His face was the hue of copper, his belly was low and sunken. The bristles on his body all pointed upwards. His head was green, and his ears were pointed like arrows. His gaping mouth extended from ear to ear, and he had 4 pointy fangs. His body was blue, and his neck was red. He tied his hair into a top knot and wore armor of brass. His chariot was equally enormous and was covered in bearskins. Pulling the chariot were 4 demonic steeds the size of elephants. His banner was tall enough to touch the sky, and atop it perched a carnivorous vulture with a blood-red body. Thus, this monstrous creature fought against Karna, who held his ground surprisingly well considering the size of his opponent. Karna was able to dispel all the illusions and deflect all magical weapons, but gradually he was beaten back. Ghatotkacha hurled an object called an asani, which sounds to me like some kind of hand grenade, because Karna jumped down, picked up the asani, and threw it back at him, forcing the Rakshasa to jump clear as it blew up his chariot. Karna then produced magical weapons of his own, but again Ghatotkacha was able to counter each of them. The Rakshasa then countered with some incredible magic. Disappearing, he transformed himself into a dark storm cloud and began raining boulders down on all the Kauravas. Now this was bad. People were getting squashed left and right. Wails of fright and agony rose up from the Kaurava army. People called to Karna, "Save us! Use your dart and kill this wretched night stalker." On the one side, Karna heard the pleas of his comrades, and on the other he considered his precious missile. He'd kept it dear to him for so many years, dreaming of the day it would bring him revenge against Arjun. Sighing deeply, he kissed his dreams goodbye and launched Indra's dart at Ghatotkacha. The Rakshasa was still in the form of the storm cloud when he was struck, and his body blazed up like a meteor as he plummeted to earth. As one last act of devotion, Ghatotkacha directed his fall over the densest crowd of Kauravas, smashing a full Aksahini of warriors to death with his monstrous corpse. Grimly, Karna ignored the cheers and praise of his comrades. He just turned his chariot around and returned to his position in the army. The fall of their most loyal and powerful son brought great despair of the Pandavas. They all embraced each other and cried. Incongruously, Krishna was smiling, hooting, and dancing a victory jig. The Pandavas all took notice and stopped and stared at him. Arjun said, "Christ, man, can't you see we just lost a family member? What are you so happy about?" Krishna said, "Don't you see? We've just won this war. As long as Karna had that dart, there was no one who could stand against him. If he still had his armor and earrings, even you and I could not beat him. Luckily, he traded those away for Indra's dart. Now, he doesn't even have Indra's dart. The way is open for us to finish up this war. Karna is no longer invincible. It won't be easy, but we shall have a chance. Watch for when his chariot wheels get stuck in the mud. Then you must slay him. I'll give you the sign. Arjun, my friend, it was for your sake that I caused Jarasandh of Chedi to be killed, as well as Eklavya of the Nishadas." Arjun asked, "What are you talking about?" Krishna then explained that had he not manipulated them way back in the book of the Assembly Hall, and earlier, then Jarasandh and Eklavya would have become fearsome opponents in this war. He said that at one point, Jarasandh had a magical cudgel that made him invincible in battle. But Balaram, in some otherwise unmentioned incident, had shattered that mace, making it possible for Bhima to kill him in the wrestling match. Krishna also claimed credit for the removal of Eklavya's thumb. If you recall, from back in episode 8, this precocious tribal boy worshipped an effigy of Drona, and from that alone was able to rival Arjun at archery. Arjun's reaction to this discovery was pretty snotty. He reported the boy to his teacher, and Drona, anxious to be the guru of the world's greatest archer, ordered the boy to cut off his own thumb. Now Krishna says that if the boy had kept his thumb, he'd have joined with the Kauravas and would have been yet another invincible obstacle to their victory. Finally, Krishna explained that this war has been particularly useful in exterminating Rakshasas. Loyal and good as he was, Ghatotkacha was a Rakshasa nevertheless. Krishna said that all Rakshasas are inimical to Brahmins and sacrifices. Thus, even Ghatotkacha had to go. Krishna said that if Karna hadn't killed the boy, he'd eventually would have had to do it himself. Thus, Karna killed two birds with one stone, and one of those birds was Karna himself. As for Karna, Krishna said, "You need no longer be anxious about killing Karna, nor need Bhima worry about killing Duryodhana. I'll tell you what you need to do when you need to do it." At this point, Dhritarashtra interrupted Sanjay's narrative. He asked a good question. He wanted to know, why was it that Karna hadn't already used this dart against Arjun? He could have saved Bhishma and ended the war a long time ago. Dhritarashtra's frustration was evident. He said, "Why didn't they think to use that dart sooner? Why didn't someone remind Karna to make use of it?" Sanjay replied, "Indeed, we did discuss it every evening. We'd say, 'Don't forget, tomorrow be sure to kill Arjun. Or even better, kill Krishna since he's the mastermind behind all of them.' But then the next morning we'd get up, go to war, and completely forget about Karna's dart." Krishna was always careful not to remind him by keeping Arjun away from a direct confrontation. Obviously, there's no way to beat the people who are protected by Krishna. Poor Yudhishthira was also heartbroken at the loss of this nephew. He recalled how Ghatotkacha had protected them in the forest and had carried them through the mountains. Weeping, he sat down in his own chariot. To comfort him, Vyasa appeared. He pointed out the obvious, which is that had Ghatotkacha been saved, the dart would have been used on Arjun, and that would have been disastrous. Besides, this war is eventually going to kill everybody, so what do you expect? That destiny will make exceptions? He concluded, saying, "It is for your own good that the Rakshasa was slain, so now get back to work, because in just 5 more days you will rule over the whole world. Just keep a steady course, and victory shall go to the righteous." Then Vyasa vanished again. By this point, it must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the soldiers were all blinded by weariness. Some fell asleep where they stood, only to be slaughtered. Seeing that both sides were suffering for lack of sleep, Arjun took matters into his own hands. He called out to both sides that they should all take a rest. It was dark anyway, so they all agreed to take a break until the moon came out to light the battle. Nobody argued with this. They just stopped fighting and lay down to sleep where they stood. As they drifted off, warriors on both sides blessed Arjun for his compassion. But it was all too short a time before the full moon rose over the horizon and lit up the field as if it were daytime. Automatically, the soldiers roused themselves and resumed their slog. Duryodhana must have the worst management style ever, because when he found out his men were sleeping on the job, he called Drona over and yelled at him. He said, "Just look at the Pandavas sleeping there. Why didn't anybody order our troops to kill them where they slept? What's wrong with you?" Drona tried to explain, but the Kaurava wasn't listening. He said, "Look, you are in charge of my army, and I'm not firing you, but I think it's time I take my own force, led by Karna, Dushasan, and Shakuni, and we'll get this job done on our own." Drona said, "You go right ahead. It's about time you made good your boasts to your father, that you and Karna and Dushasan together would kill the Pandavas. So be my guest. There's Arjun, right across from you. Go to him now, like a good Kshatriya, and your defeat shall be praised for generations to come." While Duryodhana divided up his army into two separate forces, the sun finally broke out on the horizon. Everyone stopped briefly to pay respects to the rising sun, and then the fighting recommenced on this, the morning of the 15th day of battle. Having divided up what was left of their army, Duryodhana went after the Pandavas, while Drona attacked their allies. The morning hadn't gone long before Drona killed both King Virata and his former friend and rival, King Drupada. When Drishtadyumna learned of his father's death, he howled in rage and swore an oath then and there that he would see Drona dead this very day, or he'd give up the life of a Kshatriya. Bhima heard this and groaned, not another oath. But it was too late. Day 15 would be the last day for either Drona or Drishtadyumna. Krishna also did not like to hear of these constraining oaths, but now that it was done, it was time to resort to another one of his tricks. Meanwhile, Drishtadyumna, Bhima, and Arjun had all thrown themselves against Drona. But once Drona and Arjun were engaged in combat, all the others were eclipsed by their action. Sensing that maybe he'd met his match, Drona began to resort to his magic weapons. He invoked one after the other, only to have them deflected or countered by Arjun. It says that Drona felt pride well up to see his top student performing so marvelously, but still he kept up the fight. Proud Drona, deciding that if he had to go, he would take the world with him, then conjured up the ultimate weapon, the Brahma missile. When he armed the device, the very fabric of reality began to quiver in anticipation of its destruction. Luckily, Arjun also had command of this same technology. When Drona set off the bomb, Arjun encompassed it with an equal but opposite burst of energy, counteracting and containing Drona's intended devastation. Clearly, it was time to make a move. Krishna said to the Pandavas, "As long as he has his guard up, no one can get past his defenses. Our only hope is to get him to put down his guard. Now is not the time for niceties. Let someone tell him that his son Ashwatthaman was killed in battle." This did not go over well with Arjun, while Yudhishthira was torn between obedience to Keshava and his own virtue. Bhim, however, thought it a most excellent idea. I guess these elephants had name tags because Bhim quickly found himself an elephant named Ashwatthaman and smashed its head in with his cudgel. Not waiting for any more advice, he began announcing, "Ashwatthaman is dead." Sanjay said, keeping the true fact in his mind, he said what was untrue. When Drona heard this, his limbs grew limp and he got weak in the knees. Then he pulled himself together, thinking the reports could not be credible. By now, using fair means and magic, Drona had killed over 20,000 Panchalis. It says he glowed resplendently like a smokeless fire. Sanjay said, "Beholding Drona, stationed on the field for the extermination of the Kshatriyas, the rishis Vishvamitra, Jamagdagni, Bharadvaja, Vasishta, Gautama, Kashyapa, and Atri all came to him, desirous of taking Drona to the realm of Brahma. They said to him, 'You are fighting unrighteously, and your hour of dying has come. It would behoove you to desist from such extremely cruel deeds. You are Brahmin, and such acts do not become you. It was unfair for you to use the Brahma weapon against regular people, so what you did was wrong. Your time is now over.'" Hearing this, Drona became very grim. Knowing Yudhishthira to always speak the truth, he asked him, "Is it true? Have they killed my son?" Before Yudhishthira could answer, Krishna said to him, "If Drona keeps going on like this for even a few more hours, your army will be annihilated. Remember, if telling an untruth saves even one life, no sin is incurred. There is no sin when you lie to a woman, are saving a king, or rescuing a Brahmin." Bhima chimed in, "Come on, it's no big deal. I just killed an elephant called Ashwatthaman, so there's nothing wrong with saying he's dead. I've already told him as much, but Drona doesn't trust me like he trusts you." Yudhishthira considered this for a moment, and then answered his guru. He said, "Yes, it's true. Ashwatthaman, the elephant, is dead." Yudhishthira could tell that his lie was effective, because his chariot, which used to float a hand's breadth off the ground, suddenly settled down onto the earth. Drona believed him, and was completely unmanned by the thought. Not missing his chance, Drishtadyumna notched a potent arrow to his bow, which glowed like the autumnal sun. Drona instinctively called forth his weapons to defend himself, but somehow the vital force had left him, and even those weapons that he'd used endlessly earlier in the day would no longer respond to his will. Thinking his son to be dead, and finding his magic had left him, he thought of the Rishi's words, and felt the desire to live fast fading. But still, Drona's survival instincts were not to be trifled with. The Brahmin grabbed his non-magical bow and quiver, and continued to fight with Drishtadyumna. Even without his magic, Drona was still a formidable opponent, and Drishtadyumna had a tough time of it. Drona destroyed his bows, then his chariot, and then broke his cudgel and shattered his sword. The Pandavas were forced to step in and help out. In frustration, Bhima jumped onto Drona's chariot and scolded him, saying, "If Brahmins like you had only stuck to your calling, the former race of Kshatriyas would not have been exterminated." By this, I take it he's referring to the story of how the Brahmin Rama Jamadagni, or Parashurama, killed the former race of Kshatriyas in the prior yuga. Perhaps he's implying that the old warrior caste would never have fallen as low as the current lot. Anyway, Bhima continued, "It is said that non-violence is the highest of all virtues, and Brahmins are the root of all virtue. But you have forsaken that virtue out of your desire for wealth and pride, and meanwhile your son lies dead on the battlefield, as Yudhishthira just told you. So what exactly are you trying to accomplish?" Drona listened to this carefully, and, laying aside his bow, he said, "Karna, Kripa, Duryodhana, I wish you the best of luck. As for me, I'm done with this." Laying aside his weapons, Drona sat down in his chariot and began to meditate. Drishtadyumna did not miss a beat. Grabbing a new sword, he raced over to Drona's chariot. But although Drupad's son could not see it, Drona had already departed. Sanjay said that only 5 people on the scene were able to see Drona's ascension into heaven. It looked like a second sun had risen into the sky. The 5 who could see that were Sanjay, Arjun, Ashwatthaman, Krishna, and Yudhishthira. Unaware that his victim was no longer present, Drishtadyumna grabbed Drona's long hair and sliced his head from his body. Yelling frightfully, he hurled Drona's head at the feet of the enemy, causing them to flee madly in all directions. Arjun and Yudhishthira were pretty disgusted at the needless brutality, but Bhima was jubilant. He cheered and embraced Drishtadyumna again and again. Sanjay said, "Drona was 85 years old when he fell in battle, although he fought with the energy of a 16-year-old. That's all for now. It doesn't quite finish up day 15 of the war, but it's a good stopping place. The Kaurava army is pretty broken up on news of their commander's death, but just wait until Ashwatthaman finds out what happened." Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 75, Ashwatthaman Goes Ballistic. Last episode, we saw the death of the Kuru's guru, Drona. We did not quite make it to the end of the 15th day, however, and the remainder of this day revolves around Ashwatthaman's reaction to the news of his father's death. These fighting Brahmins are odd ducks in the epic. While some themes in the epic are discussed endlessly, there seems to be one glaring theme that mostly goes unnoticed. That would be the subject of the blurring of caste distinctions. I do recall at one time the sage Markandeya describing the Kali Yuga as a time when castes got mixed up. We seem to see a lot of that in the story itself, but rarely does anyone mention it. Brahmins are supposed to be spiritual and non-violent, so why is it that some of the toughest warriors in the story are Brahmins? One could argue that Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana do not behave like true Kshatriyas, while poor Karna is treated like a Sutta when he acts like a Kshatriya. The problem cuts both ways, in that Yudhishthira would have made for a better Brahmin in the forest than a king on his throne. We get a sense of how this blurring of caste can be problematic in the characters of Drona and his son. Their pride and vanity seem especially unchivalrous. While Bhishma truly loved all of his nephews and desired most of all their welfare, Drona seemed to place his pride and his son before all else. Drona's whole feud with King Drupad had to do with his own hurt pride because the king had not honored him as he'd expected. But at least Drona had a strong sense of loyalty to his patrons, and he stuck with them even when he knew the outlook was grim. The same could not be said for Ashwatthaman, however. As far as I can tell, this boy's only real loyalty was to his father and to his own inflated ego. You can already tell that this isn't going to turn out well. When the Kauravas witnessed the death of their commanding general, it was as if the glue that held them together had suddenly dissolved. The army literally broke up into small groups, and they began to flee in all directions. Ashwatthaman's first clue that something was awry was when he saw the army around him start to break up and run away. Anxiously, he went looking for Duryodhana to find out what had happened. He asked, "Why is everyone running away, and why isn't anyone trying to stop them? Has something terrible happened?" Duryodhana then sorrowfully proceeded to explain what had happened. He said at one point, seeing their side getting beaten back, Drona fired off the Brahma weapon. The devastation of that weapon turned the tide, and now it was the Pandavas who were in trouble. Krishna then proposed that they take Drona out of commission by telling him that his son was dead. Duryodhana said, hearing Krishna's proposal, Arjun did not approve, but the others all approved of the plan, including Yudhishthira, after some initial resistance. Then it was Bhima who said Ashwatthaman is slain, but Drona did not believe him, so he asked Yudhishthira if it was true. Not wanting to lie, but desperately needing victory, Yudhishthira referred to an elephant of the same name and confirmed Bhima's lie. When Drona heard this, he no longer fought like he did before. Drishtadyumna did not fail to notice his weakness, and, ignoring the pleas and admonitions from all sides, he rushed over and cut off Drona's head while the Guru sat in prayer and meditation. Although he was forbidden to do this even by Arjun, Drishtadyumna killed your father. That is why everyone is running away. Sanjay said, hearing the tale of his father's death, Drona's son became filled with a fierce wrath. He squeezed his hands and ground his teeth and breathed like a snake, and his eyes became red as blood. Ashwatthaman said, to be killed in battle is the best way to go, but my father was unarmed and seated when he was seized by the hair and murdered. I can't believe that Yudhishthira agreed to tell such a sinful lie. I have no doubt that my father has ascended to heaven, but this humiliation is intolerable. If I do not avenge his death, then what is the point of having a son? Today, I'm going to make Drishtadyumna and Yudhishthira pay for their sins, and I've got just the thing to take them out. He then went on to explain that one time the god Narayan took the form of a Brahmin and appeared before Drona. Drona gave this Brahmin the offerings that had been meant for him, and in return, Narayan offered him a boon. Drona asked for the Narayan weapon in return. The god gave it to him and assured him that nothing was safe from this weapon, but he should be careful, because if it is used against an unarmed man, it will backfire on its wielder. Waving his secret weapon in the air, Ashwatthaman charged into battle to get his revenge. Meanwhile, on the Pandava side, there were many recriminations. Yudhishthira observed that the enemy had reformed and were charging back to resume the fighting. He asked Arjun who he thought had succeeded in rallying the troops. Arjun replied, "Who do you think it is? It's the son of the man you helped to dishonestly kill. It's the boy who, when he was born, neighed like a horse, and thus he was named Ashwatthaman. That hero is roaring again today." Drupad's son, by an exceedingly cruel act, assailed Drona and took his life as if he was not his guru. Ashwatthaman will never forgive the way he grabbed his father by the hair. And you, O king, you lied to your guru for the sake of a kingdom. You of all people should have known better than to commit such a sinful act. Your ignominy will be remembered forever in all the worlds. Drona trusted you, man. He was thinking, the son of Pandu is the most virtuous man. Besides, he's my own pupil. He would never lie to his guru. It doesn't matter that you pretended to refer to an elephant. It is still just as much a sin. You can go ahead and try to save your friend Drishtadyumna here, but there's no chance he's going to survive that boy's wrath. And you can't say I didn't tell you so. I cried out repeatedly to save his life, and yet, disregarding my advice, the disciple killed his guru. The best days are now behind us. This exceedingly unrighteous act will stain the remainder of our days. He loved us like a father. For the sake of a mere kingdom, we killed an elderly Brahmin who was unarmed and in deep meditation, and I wish I was dead. Bhima had heard enough by now, and he interrupted. Come on, what's wrong with you? You preach at us like a monk in the woods. Are you a Kshatriya or aren't you? The job of a warrior is to act in response to injustice. Have you forgotten what your enemies did to Draupadi? Perhaps you have forgiven them for all that they did to us, but you came with us to battle to perform a duty. You had sworn then to kill all of those who oppose us, but now you sit here and criticize. You know, we've had a bloody hard time of it this past week, and your words cut us more deeply than the enemy's arrows. Besides, I am your brother. You know me and my strength, so why do you even entertain any fears of Drona's son? Alone, with my mace, I'll kill him myself. Drishtadyumna was not going to let this go unchallenged either, and I guess the enemy was still a ways off. He said, So tell me, Arjun, the sages decreed the 6 duties of a Brahmin. They are sacrifices, teaching, charity, assisting in sacrifices, receiving alms, and study. Now, Which of these exactly was your Pyrrhus guru performing when he helped kill your son? No, that wicked man has fallen far from his dharma as a Brahmin, and even worse, he used weapons of mass destruction against the regular soldiers. He used illusions repeatedly against us to kill more people, and we used illusions against him. What is improper in this? I don't see what is so wonderful that his son has madly led these soldiers to their death, unprotected as they are. And how can you accuse me of killing my guru? Everyone knows I was born for this very purpose. Because he fought, he was not worthy of being a Brahmin. And because he fought unfairly, using magic weapons against the regular folks, he's not worthy to be called a Kshatriya either. That man killed my father and all my kinsmen. He had a terrible vendetta against all the people of Panchala, and he killed us relentlessly. You should be congratulating me right now. You are my liege lord, so you ought not reproach me. I forgive what you said, for my sister Draupadi's sake if nothing else. But fight now, and may victory be yours. Arjun, probably sensing that it was unbecoming to argue further, muttered a little, but he held his tongue. Satyaki, however, was too outraged to keep silent. He said, "Why do we just stand here listening to this wretch? Why doesn't someone just take him out and kill him? He's a guru killer and a Brahmin killer." Drishtadyumna replied, "I've already explained this. I was born to kill this guy. Besides, everyone has their hands dirty in this war. The Pandavas killed their own uncle Bhishma, and Arjun shot off Bhurushrava's arm unfairly. The other guys have done countless sinful things. That's how all this started. But you know what? I forgive you everything you said. We all need to stick together after all. But really, you're the last person who should be complaining after what you've done. I remember good King Bhurushrava had given up fighting and was preparing to meet his death when you ran up and cut his head off. Now that was a shameful act. And you only did it because you were mad that he was a better fighter and he had kicked you in the head. For shame." Bhima had to run over and put Satyaki in a bear hug to prevent him from jumping on Drishtadyumna. Anyway, the discussions had gone on long enough. They were all under attack after all. So it just says that Krishna and Yudhishthira, after a great effort, succeeded in pacifying the two heroes, and then they all proceeded together to commence battle. As soon as he entered the fray, Ashwatthaman did not mess around. Immediately, he flipped on his Narayan weapon. The device hummed to life, and it took on a shape like an explosive orb, full of knives, arrows, stones, and discs. Repeatedly, he set it off, mowing down soldiers by the thousands and tens of thousands. Yudhishthira said, "Holy shit, everybody run away. Forget about this war. It's every man for himself. Let Duryodhana have the crown. I killed my guru today, and I deserve to die." This was a critical moment, and Krishna moved quickly. First, he countermanded Yudhishthira's orders and told everyone to lay down their weapons and get down on the ground. He said, "If you stay on the ground, unarmed, this weapon cannot harm you, but anyone who even thinks of resisting this weapon shall be killed." Trusting Krishna and his tricks, the soldiers all obeyed, except Bhima, who took great exception to this. He said, "Nothing scares me. I don't lay my weapons down for anyone. And you, Arjun, don't put aside your Gandhava bow. That would be dishonorable." Arjun said, "Well, actually, I swore an oath once that I would never use my bow against Brahmins, cattle, and the Narayan weapon, so I sort of have no choice." Now that sounds a little too convenient for me, but Bhim didn't question it. Neither did he put his weapon down. As the only armed man, the energy from the Narayan weapon arced over to Bhima and engulfed him in a bright blare of electricity. Arjun wasn't going to let his brother be killed that easily, so he created a magic shield for him, protecting Bhima from the worst of the blast. But still, the energy of the Narayan weapon had nowhere else to go than to Bhima, and the intensity grew to the point that neither the Pandava nor his chariot were visible beneath the glow. To help protect him, Krishna and Arjun ran into the beam. Being unarmed, they were still unaffected, so Krishna yelled at Bhima, saying, "What's the matter? Lay down your weapon. If I thought you had a chance against this guy, do you think I would have told you to put down your arms?" Finally, Bhima came to his senses and put down his cudgel. Instantly, the deadly energy of that weapon dissipated, leaving just a cool breeze over the battlefield. Duryodhana called to Ashwatthaman, "Look, they're picking up their weapons. Shoot them again." But Ashwatthaman said, "Sorry, but that was only good for one shot. Krishna has outmaneuvered us again." Duryodhana said, "Oh well, never mind. You've got plenty more magic weapons where that came from. I'm sure you'll do better next time." Indeed, the Kaurava was quite right. After dueling with Drishtadyumna, Satyaki, and Bhim, and driving each of them from the field, Ashwatthaman found himself up against Arjun. And this time, Arjun was not in so forgiving a mood. But, rather than trying his luck against the Pandava, Ashwatthaman conjured up his Agneya weapon, probably the closest thing to a nuclear bomb, and he set it off right in the heart of the battle. We are told that the force of this blast killed an entire Aksahini of Pandava troops, something like 100,000 men, and when it was done, the charred corpses were indistinguishable from one another. Only Arjun and Krishna were able to protect themselves from this blast. Despite the horrendous loss of life, the fact that Arjun had survived the very worst weapons anyone had thrown at him was a great victory for the Pandavas. Ashwatthaman was sorely dispirited to see that his most precious WMD were insufficient for the job. In anger and frustration, he turned his car around and drove away from the battle. Looking to heaven, he asked, "Why? Why didn't my weapon blow up the whole world like my dad promised it would? Why did it only kill a few foot soldiers, and Arjun got out of it completely unhurt?" He wasn't the only person likely to ask this question, so Vyasa stepped in to explain. He said, "You ask a good question, my son. The ancient Rishi Narayan is said to be older than even the gods. In his austerities, he created Nar, and this pair together attain the highest level of awareness. You, on the other hand, derive your power from Shiva." Vyasa's explanation was much more wordy than that, but that is about all I could make out of his explanation. In any case, this seemed to satisfy Ashwatthaman somewhat, and he ordered the Kauravas to turn in for the night, and this ended the 15th day of the war. This also ends the book of Drona, the 7th book of the Mahabharata. I'm going to press on to the next book, however. That would be Book 8, the Karna Parva. The story of the 15th day carries on into the 8th book, so I'd like to continue to get a better stopping point in the story. Next episode, I plan on making a brief digression from the story itself, so we can look back on the story so far and explore some ideas I have about the book and the times it describes. Getting back to the story, the Book of Karna begins with the withdrawal of the Kaurava troops at the end of day 15. It says that, back at the camp, Duryodhana led the main surviving heroes to greet Ashwatthaman and to commiserate with him. It was a somber moment, and no one had much to say, so they soon broke up and went to their tents. None of them slept that night, however, because they each were haunted by memories of the dice game. The next morning, they went through the motions of preparing for battle. With no deliberation and barely any ceremony, Karna was appointed the new commander-in-chief of the Kaurava army. Even the boastful Karna spared us a speech. We've all heard it before anyway. Sanjay tells us that the Pandavas spent the night without incident, and went to war resolved to win. Then he said, "The Kurus and the Pandavas then resumed their tumultuous battle, each eager for victory. The two armies battled for 2 days while Karna was in command, and it was really spectacular. But then, after he killed a lot of people, Karna was killed by Palguna while the Dhartarashtras looked on." It says, Sanjay then went quickly to Hastinapur and reported to Dhritarashtra everything that had happened. You know, I've been getting suspicious of that whole Sanjay has divine sight plot device for quite a while now. I haven't mentioned it before, but there have been occasional hints in the text that there existed a version of this story in which Sanjay is reporting the battle as he witnessed it in person. For instance, when reporting emotional scenes, he would say things like, "We all wept when we saw whatever," making it seem that he was actually there when it happened, as opposed to being an all-seeing eavesdropper. I never liked the way they contrived to give Sanjay his divine sight either. As I recall, Krishna makes a special trip down to Hastinapur just before the war, and all just to make sure Dhritarashtra gets to experience the war firsthand. Then he leaves again to get back to preparing for war. My best guess is that the author originally intended to have Sanjay report the war in the form of dispatches from the battlefield. But then as he went along, he wanted to be able to have Dhritarashtra react to events and ask questions while the action was still underway. Thus, he rather crudely worked in the divine sight device. And then he failed to expunge the evidence of the prior explanation. Anyway, that's all for now. When the story picks up, we'll have Karna in charge, at least for a couple of days. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 76. Some thoughts on the story so far. Ever since episode 2, this podcast has been dedicated almost completely to the story of the Mahabharata as it is written in the critical edition and the Ganguly translation. Of course, I've always commented freely on the particular subjects that came up, but I've not had the opportunity to explore some more general ideas and questions that I've had about this enigmatic treasury of ancient wisdom. Since around the Book of the Forest, I've been looking for a nice stopping point to do something like this, but the story really has a way of propelling you forward. Even when things get really boring or pedantic, it only makes you want to press on harder to get to the more interesting stuff. I thought of doing this right before the war started, but then we wanted to get to the Gita, and after that we wanted to get to the war, so really there's no good stopping place. Taking a moment in the midst of the war is perhaps the best time to stop. Frankly, the colossal violence is difficult for me to relate, so it's nice to take a break from it. The pace and the scale of the killing has been relentless. For most of the people, death comes all too easily, as hundreds of thousands are killed without barely a mention. Meanwhile, certain characters just won't die soon enough. It makes me really start to wish it were over already. But as painful as all this can be at times, it is clear that Vyasa is trying to make a strong impression on us how violent and horrible the war really was. He makes sure that no one listening carefully to this story can come through and still harbor delusions about the glory and nobility of total war. Well then, we might as well start on the subject of war. The more we go through the experience of Kurukshetra, the more strongly I feel the parallels between this war and the wars of the 20th century. As the battle grinds on, there's a real sense of total war between the combatants. All the old niceties are dropping to the wayside as nuclear-like weapons are used against defenseless masses of people. Even the good guys must resort to subterfuge and must sacrifice their own sons in order to win. The run-up to the war was very reminiscent of the start of World War I, in the sense that both sides firmly believed that war was the only and inevitable solution to their problems. In addition, Duryodhana's fanatical drive for total victory or total defeat and his complete disregard for the well-being of his men bears a striking resemblance to Adolf Hitler. These strange parallels might be more than mere coincidence, however. But to see that, we should first take a step back to the beginning of the book and its cosmological setting. The foundation myth for the Mahabharata begins with the story of the creation of the Amrit and the war that ensued. The way it is told in the book at the beginning is that the gods held a meeting at Mount Meru so they could discuss how they might get their hands on some Amrit, the elixir of immortality. The god Narayan, or Vishnu, explained to them that they needed to churn the ocean with the help of the demonic asuras, and together they would create the Amrit, like butter in a churn. So the gods used the king of snakes as a rope, and Mount Mandana as the churn. We're not told what promises or representations were made to the asuras. We only know that they helped out, expecting to get some of that Amrit. Altogether, the gods and demons yanked on the snake and churned the ocean. As they tugged, the friction made the snake belch forth fire and smoke, which roasted the creatures of the earth. But we're talking about gods here, so Indra simply conjured a rainstorm and put out the fires. The resulting flood also washed the burnt animal guts into the ocean, and that, plus the cooked herbs and molten gold, proved to be the secret ingredient. The ocean turned to milk, and the milk congealed into Amrit. Incidentally, it also produced the sun, the moon, the goddess Shri, liquor, a white horse, and the Kaustubha jewel that adorns Vishnu. The Amrit arrived in a gourd, and the Asuras grabbed it. That trickster Vishnu then turned into a beautiful demoness, and she was offered the first drink. He then handed it over to the gods. Only one Asura ever got a drink of the Amrit. It was the demon named Rahu, and he just got it into his mouth, but then Vishnu cut off his head. His head flew up into the sky, where it still exists in Indian astrology, occasionally eating up the sun and moon during solar eclipses. The rest of the Asuras never got to drink the elixir, and a great war broke out. After much back and forth, the gods were eventually victorious. This story links into the Mahabharata by what happens next. We are told that these defeated Asuras took a great interest in the earth, and they began incarnating as humans in vast numbers. The worst of them were born as kings and kshatriyas, and they oppressed all the people. Finally, Mother Earth could herself no longer bear the burden of their oppression, so she petitioned Brahma to help her. Brahma's solution was to have all the gods also incarnate as humans, so they may fight fire with fire. To top it off, Vishnu agreed to also be born on Earth to save us from these evil men and to herald the new Kali Yuga. And thus we get to the interesting little essay called The Partial Incarnations. In this section, well before the story's begun, we are given a peek behind the scenes and see who each of these characters really were, not their mortal names and characteristics, but the name and character of the very soul they had incarnated from. The Mahabharata is not some petty squabble among Bronze Age chieftains. Rather, it is the continuation of the cosmic war for immortality. At this stage in the epic, the story is presented mostly as a dialogue between Janamejaya, Arjun's great-grandson, and Vaisampayana, who was Vyasa's disciple. Janamejaya wanted to know specifically who had incarnated as whom in the story. At the time, I glossed over it, because I hadn't introduced any of these characters yet. At this point in the story, however, the information is much more interesting. For instance, Drona was the soul of Brihaspati incarnate. Ashwatthaman was born from the qualities of Shiva, specifically death, lust, and fury. Shakuni was the reincarnation of Dvapar, the trickster figure we met as one of the two tormentors of Nala and Damayanti. Kali and Dvapar are also the names of the two worst yugas. In this version, Duryodhana is said to be the incarnation of Kali. I think this refers to the Kali in the Kali Yuga and the mean guy in the story of Nala. This is my guess because other than these two references, the goddess Kali is never mentioned by that name. The author goes on to say that Duryodhana was a creature of discord, hated by all the world, and it was he who caused the great massacre that was the war of Kurukshetra. The rest of his brothers were all just reincarnated Rakshasas. As for the Pandavas, there is much confusion about their origins. We know from the story that their fathers were gods, Dharma, Vayu, Indra, and the Ashvins, but one's parentage is not one's soul. Thus, when Vyasa is trying to justify the marriages of 5 men to one Draupadi, he explains to King Drupad that in actuality all 5 brothers had the one soul of Indra. That was called the tale of the 5 Indras. But here, in the partial incarnations, we're told that they both have the father and the soul of each of their respective gods. Frankly, I do not see how this can be reconciled without some metaphysical sleight of hand, but if you have any suggestions, please send them my way. Since I believe we have to choose, I tend to accept the 5 Indras version, because it is more vital to the story. Without it, Vyasa had no case for justifying the marriage of 5 men to one woman. Moving on, Abhimanyu was Soma incarnate, and Drishtadyumna was Agni, the fire god. Sikandin was just a Rakshasa. Another contradiction is that Arjun is also the incarnation of Nara, the divine proto-rishi and companion to Narayan Krishna. The story of the partial incarnations also endorses the legend of Krishna's 16,000 wives, and says they're all Apsaras incarnate. The goddess Shri, born alongside the Amrit, became Draupadi. Since this epic is so firmly rooted into the legend of the Amrit, I think the story of its creation deserves a closer look. To produce the Amrit, the gods and asuras must combine their powers to churn a mountain. The image of a mountain with its peak moving in a circular motion is too strongly reminiscent of the precession of the equinoxes to be an accident. In case you're not familiar with the precession, it is also known in astrology as the Great Year. You may have heard that we live at the dawn of the age of Aquarius. Well, that is what they're referring to. The precession is an apparent wobble in the tilt of the Earth's axis of rotation. One of the observational effects of this is that the sunrise on the spring equinox occurs in a new constellation every 2,160 years. Thus, at the time of Jesus, the sun rose in the constellation of Pisces, and only in recent decades has it begun to move into the constellation of Aquarius. Another effect of this 26,000-year great cycle is the slow change in what appears to be the pole star. The star that we call the North Star today will not always be the center of the sky's rotation. In fact, the center point of the northern sky slowly traces a circle in the sky, moving in the opposite direction to the Earth's rotation. I hope I'm explaining this phenomenon clearly. If not, please look it up online. There are lots of good diagrams there. But the thing that ties the precession with the story of the Amrit is this image of a churning mountain. If you were to stand to the south of a northern mountain and were to watch it night after night for 26,000 years, you would see that mountain trace a circle in the sky as if it were being churned. Thus, the image of the gods and asuras using their combined powers to churn the oceans sounds like a mythic recollection of the precessional phenomenon. The subject of the precession was also brought to mind when we got to the Markandeya stories in the Book of the Forest. In one of those sessions, episode 38, the sage describes the yuga cycle, and in his calculation, the 4 yugas combined add up to 13,000 years, precisely one half of a precessional cycle. At the time, I chalked it up to coincidence, but now I'm not so sure. In the 19th century, the Swami Sri Yukteswar Giri wrote a little book in which he correlated the yugas precisely with the 26,000-year precession cycle. His essay on the subject, in a book called The Holy Science, was quite short, but it's packed with ideas. For one, he posits that the solar system is orbiting the center of the galaxy, something astronomers did not observe until 50 years later. Sri Yukteswar also stated that the sun has a binary twin, and the 2 stars orbit each other. While this has not yet been observed by astronomers, there is evidence for it, and it certainly has not been disproven. One of the best clues to the existence of a binary twin to the sun is the so-called precessional wobble. Modern astronomers typically explain the precession as a wobble in the Earth's rotation. But it could just as well be explained by a 26,000-year journey made by the whole solar system around another star. According to Sri Yukteswar, this orbital journey takes our solar system closer and then farther away from the center of the galaxy. The galactic center is also the source of what he calls Dharma. When our solar system is furthest away from the galactic center, Dharma is weak in the world, and we call that the Kali Yuga. Thus, Markandeya's calculations described our journey away from the galactic center, tracing the decline in Dharma from the golden age of the Krita Yuga down to the end of the Kali Yuga, which was far off in his future, but deep in our past. What Markandeya did not address is what he expected would happen when we transitioned from the end of the Kali Yuga back to the new golden age. The assumption seems to have been that some sort of direct leap back into the golden age would occur. Taking the motions of astronomy as a guide, and perhaps his own intuitive powers, Sri Yukteswar accounted for the journey back from Kali Yuga as a motion in the opposite direction. Thus, the Kali Yuga began with the death of Krishna and ran for 1,200 years. This brought us to the year AD 500. At that point, the solar system was at its furthest from the center, and Dharma was at its weakest. Then we resumed our return journey to the center, and a new ascending Kali Yuga began. From there, Dharma slowly retrenched itself on Earth until the 20th century, when we finally re-entered the Dvapar Yuga. Thus, we are currently living in the ascending Dvapar Yuga, and we could look forward to things getting better, more Dharma, as we move to the future. I think this helps to explain the overriding sense of decline that we see in the epic and many other ancient texts, as opposed to our own more modern-day sense of progress and optimism. Just as I was pondering Markandeya and Sri Yukteswar, a new book came out on this very subject. The book is called The Yugas by Joseph Selby, and in it he develops a system and uses it to explain the arc of world history. The story of decline and subsequent recovery helps explain a lot about ancient history. For instance, when it comes to Bronze Age building techniques, older is almost always better. The oldest pyramids were the best built, and the same goes for other parts of the ancient world. The Indus Valley cities seem to have been at their best when they were just built, and subsequent layers show a relentless decline. One of the mysteries that this system of analysis might resolve is the question of magic. Why is it that the further back in time you go, the more the people of the time believed in the reality and ubiquity of magic? This may be explained if we can better understand what this force of Dharma really is. What if Dharma is much more than just the subtle ordering of society? What if this is something more like the Force, as described in Star Wars movies? Is it possible that in our recent history, Dharma has been so weak that we cease to believe in its existence? Perhaps in the Kali Yuga, it was so weak that only the most ardent practitioners were able to utilize it. Maybe all the supernatural weapons and creatures of the Mahabharata will again become apparent as Dharma continues to be restored to the world. Just because we've never seen an archer enchant an arrow capable of blowing up a city, does it mean that it cannot be done? Maybe as the energy for doing these things was lost, we forgot how to manipulate it, and even quit believing it existed. Now that the energy is once again returning to the world, all we need to do is start making use of it again. This is where the timing of the Mahabharata and Sri Yukteswar's Yuga calculations get interesting. You see, today, we are living at the dawn of the Dvapar Yuga, and we have only recently escaped the influence of the Kali Yuga. The Mahabharata takes place at almost the exact same time in the descending Dvapar Yuga. They were living in the twilight of the Dvapar age and were about to enter the darkness of the Kali Yuga. Thus, there's a very real relationship between the fanaticism and violence of the 20th century and the events of the Mahabharata. The difference is that we can expect a happy ending after all the wars, while our heroes only expected more and more decline into darkness. So maybe Arjun's nuclear-tipped arrows and flying chariots are not fantastical imaginings as we commonly assume. Maybe there was just a lot more magic in the world at that time. And if there was that much magic available at the end of the descending Dvapar Yuga, perhaps magic is available for us today if we just tried to make use of it. As we all know from traditions, magic is powered by thought and intention, so clearly, as long as we do not believe in magic, we certainly are not going to be able to use it. On the other hand, it is probably a good thing that people do not know how to conjure a nuclear-tipped arrow, because humanity today is just not enlightened enough to be trusted with such power. This leads me to my next question, which is the precise nature of the breakdown that caused the Mahabharata war in the first place. It does seem apparent that it was a danger and a nuisance to have all these barbarians running around with explosive arrows. So perhaps part of Krishna's mission was to rid the world of these dangerous elements, because Dharma was too weak to keep them in line anymore. But there's one other theme that we see glaringly in the epic, but is rarely commented on. This is the pervasive confusion among the castes. Many characters simply do not behave according to the caste they were born into. As I mentioned last episode, the most obvious examples are the fighting Brahmins, Kripa, Drona, and Ashwatthaman. This exception to the priestly rule was so blatant that even one of the characters, Drishtadyumna, complained about it. But fighting Brahmins are just the beginning of the problem. We also have some very unchivalric Kshatriyas. We are told that it's okay for a Kshatriya to be proud and to be a fighter, but they should also be generous and fair-minded. Duryodhana and his father make for very poor Kshatriyas, and it is really their character that makes them unworthy of being king, not their disabilities or birth order. Yudhishthira seems to reflect the mirror opposite of the problem. As even his brothers sometimes complain, the eldest Pandava has a temperament more fit for a Brahmin than a Kshatriya. And Karna, of course, is the best example of a character born to the wrong caste. He's a Sutta who acts like a Kshatriya. One could strongly argue that all of the problems that led to the war stemmed from this confusion of caste identities. To modernize, the caste system seems fatally flawed due to this problem. How can the random accident of birth determine irrevocably one's position in life? From my perspective, I cannot see how the system could have ever worked fairly, but the author and his characters all assume that this is the only way society could function. In fact, their prediction for the coming Kali Yuga was that the castes would no longer be respected, and all of society would break down as a result. The Mahabharata tends to play out according to this prediction, because the characters do not act according to their caste, and all hell breaks out as a result. But then, how did the system ever work out well? It seems to me that there are two possibilities. The first is that somehow, in ancient times, the children born to a Vaishya, for instance, were just like their parents and had a bourgeois sensibility. So perhaps at that time everyone was born to the appropriate caste for their own nature. The alternate explanation is that at one time caste was not inherited from one's parents. In this case, your personal affinities marked you out for one caste or another. Unfortunately, the Mahabharata never tries to explore these possibilities, so it seems we were left guessing. Its only explanation for what went wrong was that demons had incarnated as Kshatriyas, and the Kali Yuga was fast approaching. The overriding sense that we get from ancient literature is that the people were living in a time of decline and dissolution. The people all believed that the Golden Age was behind them, and things were only going to get worse. Our modern mindset is just the opposite. We assume that our future is destined to grow in knowledge and technology, even despite occasional setbacks. We tend to read this back into the past and assume that the ancients must have been more primitive than people who came later. If Markandeya and Sri Yukteswara's calculations of the yugas are correct, then perhaps we were both right. The ancients lived in a period of decline, while we live in the brink of a new golden age. Let's all hope this is true. It makes me feel better already. Before I wrap up this little digression, there's one other observation I have to make about this story. The marriage of 5 brothers to Draupadi is a real anomaly in Hindu literature. Even Vyasa is forced to admit that there's no precedent in history or scripture to justify it. The only way he can explain it is by first saying it's okay because he said it's okay, and secondly, he points to the story of the 5 Indras to make the case that they may be 5 men, but they share a single soul, that of Indra. I've pondered this and watched for clues, and I've only come up with one hypothesis, which is that the 5 brothers were a literary device, and they were originally a single person. The strongest clue we get from the story is the consistent association of the various Pandavas with parts of the body. Yudhishthira clearly represents the head, while Bhima is the right arm and the stomach. For instance, when Bhima gets into a war with Kubera in the Himalaya, Yudhishthira feels a pain in his right arm that tells him his brother is in trouble. Arjun is often called the left-handed archer. He's also associated with the sex organs. When the brothers go into hiding, it's Arjun who must conceal his virility by pretending to be a eunuch. Arjun is also the only progenitor of the 5 brothers. As the possessor of their collective penis, he's the one who begets the son who begets the heirs of the dynasty. Spoiler alert, none of the other Pandava sons survived to take the throne or bear offspring. Finally, the twins represent the legs, good-looking, useful, but otherwise unremarkable. Thus, is it possible that in some earlier version of the epic, there was only one Pandava, perhaps named Arjun, who was as wise as Yudhishthira, as strong as Bhima, as potent as Arjun, and as good-looking as the twins? So then, why would Vyasa feel the need to split this one hero into 5 pieces? My guess is that it had to do with the literary styles available to him at the time. If you pay close attention to the style of storytelling in the epic, you'll notice that it concerns itself with what people did and what they said. Inner thoughts are rarely expressed, and inner conflict is never mentioned. Thus, we might guess that part of Dhritarashtra's motivation is driven by an inner conflict over what he knows to be right and his own resentments. But as long as he's not honest enough to express this inner thought, we will never know it. If the 5 Pandavas were compressed into a single character, all of this one character's inner conflicts would have been hidden from us. The Yudhishthira part of him would be inclined towards humility and righteousness, but the Bhima part of him would want revenge and would require restraint. How does one relate this inner conflict if you're constrained to action and dialogue? The solution is ingenious. Split that complex character into 5 parts and let them work out the psychological drama amongst themselves. Vyasa could have easily resolved the problem of Draupadi's marriage in several other ways. He could have just had her marry Arjun. But perhaps he left that one conundrum there on purpose, as a reminder of this first Pandava, the Proto-Arjun. Well, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. It feels good to get all this off my chest. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 77, Karna's in Charge. Last time, we took a brief hiatus from the story, so I could unload on you all the ideas I've had knocking around in my head since I started this project. Hopefully there was something in there to spark your own interest, so if you have any comments or anything to contribute, perhaps to answer some of my questions, please visit my blog and leave a comment. That is at www.mahabharatapodcast.com. In the episode before that, we left off just at the beginning of the Karna Parva, or the Book of Karna. This is the third of the so-called battle books, each of which is named after the commander in charge at that time in the war. When Bhishma was made commander, it was a big deal. Drona also got appointed and anointed with much ceremony. But now that these luminaries are out of the way, Karna's appointment seemed to pass by with very little fanfare. As Sanjay has done at the outset of each commander's appointment, he quickly glossed over their career and suddenly announced that the commander, in this case Karna, got killed after 2 days of fighting. Perhaps he was planning on skipping ahead to the aftermath of Karna's defeat, but of course Dhritarashtra stopped him and made him go back and tell all the details of Karna's downfall. Oddly enough, the whole pretense of Sanjay's divine sight is dropped at this point. We are told that, after Karna had been killed, Sanjay traveled all night with fast horses back to Hastinapur to deliver the news. The bard says that Sanjay, after traveling all night from the battlefield, entered the king's residence, which was emptied of all the men. Tired and full of despair, he greeted the king and then said, "Sanjay here, I hope you are happy now, since you were warned so many times not to get into this mess." Dhritarashtra said, "Of course I was devastated to hear about Bhishma and Drona's downfall. I really thought they could not be beaten. So tell me now, what happened next? Don't spare any detail." Sanjay said, "Okay then, but hang on to your seat because it gets ugly. I'm afraid you can't stand the news." The king replied, "I can handle it. I already know that this was all fated to happen, so tell me everything." Sanjay then backed up to the morning of the 16th day. He said that the news of Drona's death had spread fear and despair among the Kauravas, so Duryodhana tried to cheer them up a bit. He said, "In war, there is only victory or death, so why should our situation come as any surprise to you? In any case, all is not yet lost. Look here, we still have that great archer Karna. Hasn't he repeatedly forced Arjun to retreat from battle? He also killed that horrific demon Gatotkacha. We've still got him and Drona's son on our side, so what's there to worry about?" Then Sanjay just skipped ahead right to the end of the story again. He said, "After Karna was made general, he roared like a lion and attacked. He caused great carnage and killed warriors by the 1,000. But then, after tormenting the Panchalas and Pandavas, he was felled by Arjun." Hearing that the last bastion to his son's survival had fallen, Dhritarashtra took it as if his sons were already dead. He fell to the ground in a dead faint. In the ensuing chaos, the womenfolk began wailing, thinking all was lost. Vidor came rushing to the king's side and splashed water on his face to wake him up, while Gandhari also fell into a faint. When the king regained consciousness, at first he was confused and unsure what was going on. Gradually he regained his senses and said, "How is it that my son still lives now that Karna has fallen?" Grimly, Sanjay said, "King, the mighty warrior Karna has been killed along with his brothers and sons, and Dushasan has been killed by the great Pandava, and in his rage Bhima drank his blood." Again, old King Dhritarashtra was struck with the fainting spell. Once he had again regained his senses, he asked calmly to be told all the details of Karna's downfall. And so, for the third time, Sanjay backed up to the night of the 15th day and provided more details regarding Karna's election and subsequent fall. He said that at the end of the day's fighting, when everyone had put their weapons down and cleaned up, Duryodhana held a council meeting. The Kaurava king opened up the discussion by asking, "Now that Drona is gone, what do you all suggest we do next?" It was Ashwatthaman who spoke up, saying, "Although we have lost some of the best of our warriors, now is not the time for despair. We still have Karna on our side, and I recommend that you appoint him to be our new commander." Everybody else agreed with this, so Duryodhana addressed Karna, saying, "Now that both of my generals have been killed, please be our commander. You are better than the both of them, but we only made them commander out of respect and because you advised us to. But after all, both of them, great as they were, had a soft spot for our enemies. We've wasted many days because they protected the Pandavas when we should have been killing them. But now that is over, and now we have the chance to finish this war as we should have done days ago. Karna replied, I have not forgotten how I promised you that I would defeat the Pandavas. Well, have no fear, I will be your general, and you can consider the enemy as good as vanquished. And so the loyal Brahmins were summoned, paid large sums in gold, and Karna was consecrated commander-in-chief of the Kaurava army, the third to hold that title in 15 days. It says that when the soldiers saw Karna, brilliant on his chariot like the noonday sun, they forgot all the previous disasters, and once again felt that victory was assured. Yudhishthira, on the other hand, had a very different assessment. He saw this remnant of the Kaurava army, bereft of so many great warriors, and felt that this remainder could be mowed down as easily as grass. Both sides, confident of victory, then marched to begin the 16th day of the battle. There aren't many heroes left on the Kaurava side, so the day's fighting began with a few lesser-known Kaurava heroes getting killed by Bhima and Arjun. Later, Bhima squared off with Ashwatthaman, and the pair were well matched. Both were knocked unconscious and had to be carried off the field. Arjun then took on a bunch of unnamed assailants and made short work of the lot of them. The immortal sages who were watching from overhead all cheered and sang fight songs for Arjun. By then, Ashwatthaman had recovered enough for this to bother him, so he attacked Arjun. The pair traded blows for a while, but soon Ashwatthaman was reminded that he was no match for Kunti's son. He managed to injure Krishna, but that only made Arjun mad, and he quickly disarmed Drona's son and sent him running for cover. As he fled, Ashwatthaman reconsidered ever fighting Arjun again, and began to believe that the Pandavas' victory was inevitable. As for Arjun, he resumed the chore of exterminating the Kaurava rank and file with his arrows. Perhaps due to this shortage of heroes, we are suddenly introduced to a new character, an ally of the Pandavas referred to only as the Pandya king. This Pandya king was a pretty good fighter. He dueled with Ashwatthaman for a while, and even produced some magic weapons, but eventually Drona's son got the better of him, and the Pandya king was killed. While Arjun was exterminating Kaurava soldiers, Karna was doing similar damage to the Pandavas' Shrunjaya allies. Satyaki rode out with Draupadi's sons, the Draupadeyas, to resist him. Sahadev had a brief encounter with Dushasan and knocked him unconscious, forcing him to be driven off the field. With Sahadev's victory still fresh, Nakul tried to outdo him by taking on Karna. Unwisely, he even taunted Karna, saying, "Come and fight. You're the cause of all this conflict. You're the reason the Kurus are divided and fighting one another. Once I've killed you, we'll be done with this feud." Karna replied, "Bring it on, my boy. Words are cheap. Let's fight." Then the pair engaged in battle. Nakul did pretty good at first. He managed to injure Karna and killed all of his escort, but ultimately the son of Asuta got the upper hand, demolishing all of the Pandavas' weapons. When Nakul realized he'd been beaten, he turned to flee the battle. Laughing, Karna pursued him, reached out with his bow, and hooked the Pandava's neck in its crook. Karna said, "What was that you were saying to me? Tell me again so I can thrash your ass one more time. Next time be sure to fight with your equals. Now run home, boy." While the carnage continued on both sides, Yudhishthira squared off with his rival Duryodhana. The pair traded blows for a while, but eventually Yudhishthira began to give more than he got. The Dharmaraja killed his cousin's driver and horses, forcing Kripa to race over and carry him away from danger. Still no mention of what happened to Duryodhana's magic armor. Sanjay summarized the afternoon's action like this. Karna slaughtered the Panchalas, Dhananjaya slaughtered the Trigartas, while Bhimasena killed a whole division of elephants. Then the sun drew near the western hills, and then set while the fighting continued. But because of the darkness, and especially because of the dust, we could no longer see friend or foe. Thus the mighty archers, terrified of fighting in the dark, retreated with all their warriors. Sanjay said the Pandavas went to their camp in good cheer, feeling that they had been the victors of that day. As dawn broke out on the morning of the 17th day, Karna had a conference with Duryodhana. He complained that he was Arjun's superior in every way. Even his bow, called Vijaya, was superior to Arjun's Gandhava, but he still had one critical disadvantage, a good driver. After all, Arjun had that special celestial chariot and one of the greatest drivers at the reins. All he needed to be Arjun's match in every way was to have a driver as good as or better than Krishna. Fortunately for them, they believed they had just the guy on their side, good old King Shalya. According to Karna, Shalya was the very best horseman in India, so with him as his driver, victory would be assured. I'd like to get back to the subject of Karna's bow for a minute. As an aside, Karna said that the Vijaya bow had originally belonged to Indra, and that Indra had given it to Rama Bhargava, or Rama Jamadagnya, or Parashuram. Then Rama gave it to him. Here we get another hint at the story of how Karna got trained by Ramajamadagnya. So far, we're yet to be told that story. It seems the author assumes we know it by now. Anyway, getting back to Karna and his charioteer, Duryodhana went to King Shalya most politely. He said, "You've heard what Karna just said, and since you have no equal on the battlefield, with all humility and deference, I beg you, please be Karna's charioteer. Because if you become his driver, we have no doubt that the two of you will overwhelm the enemy. Those guys won't stand a chance." But old Shalya did not consider this to be complimentary in the least. Rather, he took the request as an insult. Getting red in the face, he said angrily, "How dare you ask me to be that Sutputra's driver? You praised him as if he were better than us, but he's no equal of mine. I'll tell you what, assign me my share of the enemy, I will go out and kill them, and then allow me to go home. But don't dishonor me with such impudent suggestions. For shame, asking me to be the charioteer to a charioteer's son." The old king of the Madras, the twins' uncle, got so offended that he got up and left, ordering his retinue to prepare to return home. Duryodhana had to run out and persuade him to turn around. He explained his logic in a more flattering light. He said that he had no doubt that Shalya was one of the very best fighters, but what they needed was balance. Duryodhana said, "You see, Karna can defeat Arjun, but Arjun has Krishna, and only you are as good as Krishna at driving the horses. So we need you to hold that position. You'll notice that Krishna doesn't feel dishonored to be Arjun's driver, so neither should you feel bad about driving Karna against them." Shalya said, "Well, since you put it that way, I'm okay with it. I will fight against Krishna while Karna takes on Arjun. I have only one stipulation, which is that I may freely speak my mind to Karna at any time." Duryodhana and Karna both readily agreed to that. Sure, why not? They had gotten their driver, so what could possibly go wrong? Karna still thought Shalya was a bit reluctant to serve as his driver, so he asked Duryodhana to have some words in private with Shalya. The Kaurava took Shalya aside and said, "You see, Karna is not what he appears to be. After all, he studied the art of war under Rama Jamadagnya. And do you think Rama would have accepted a Sutta as his disciple? Far from it. It is obvious from his bearing and his loyalty that Karna must be the son of a god and a true-born Kshatriya. I have no doubt of that." Shalya did not seem overly concerned, as long as he was allowed to speak freely while at the reins. As the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Karna and Shalya mounted the massive chariot to prepare for war. Duryodhana praised the pair of warriors and then reminded them of their mission. He said, "Heroic son of Adiratha, our future glory depends on you. My previous two generals both failed in their missions, so now those tasks rest on your shoulders. You must kill Arjun and Bhima and take Yudhishthira captive. Go now, and may victory be yours." Proudly, Karna called out, "Drive those horses, mighty king, while I make quick work of Bhima and Arjun. Today I'll destroy the Pandavas and bring victory to our side." Shalya whipped the horses into a gallop, but he took exception to Karna's boasting. He said, "Hey, Sutputra, how can you still talk like that after all we've been through already? You can't possibly believe that the Pandavas are as easy to kill as all that. You won't be bragging like that after you've felt the sting of Arjun's arrows." Karna just bit his tongue and commanded the army to move out. As the Kaurava chariots trundled forward, Karna advised his fellow fighters. He told them to watch out for the Pandavas, because they were all fierce fighters. He said, "You guys just leave them up to me. I shall take them on, one by one, and kill them. And if I fail, I'm ready to meet my death, but it shall be either them or me." Shalya interrupted, saying, "Stop it. You talk way too much. How can you compare yourself to Dhananjaya? He is an upright and virtuous man, and I can't say the same for you. Think of all that crazy shit Arjun has done in the past. What have you done that even compares with that? And every time you have confronted the man, you've been beaten back. So what makes you think you'll have a different outcome this time?" Karna said, "Get off my back, old man. Like it or not, we're fighting Arjun today, so let the outcome of the battle speak for itself." As their commander, Karna took the lead and roused the troops with offers of gifts. He said, "To the first man who spots Arjun today, I shall reward with a wagon load of jewels." The troops all cheered this. Encouraged, Karna went on, "Whoever can lead me to Arjun, I shall give 100 slave girls, each wearing a golden collar." Again, this was met with more cheers. But again, Shalya threw a wet blanket on Karna's boasts. He said, "Oh, Sutputra, you'll see Arjun soon enough. Don't waste your time handing out money like a Vaishya banker. You might as well reward your own executioner." Now Karna started to get annoyed. He said, "Only the truly noble can recognize their fellows, and you, sir, are no true nobleman. I know all about Arjun and his weapons, but that doesn't scare me. Arjun's bow and Krishna's disc may terrify normal folks, but they only make me long to fight them. But you wouldn't understand such sentiments. After all, you're from Madra, and no real Kshatriyas come from that country. You don't know what you're talking about. I could kill 1,000 Arjuns and Krishnas, so I think you should hold your tongue. On the other hand, I know all about your people. I know how you let your women and children mingle freely with slaves and outcasts. Your best families all enjoy drinking and eating beef. The Madras are barely civilized. It is well known that you cannot trust a Madra at his word. There is no friendship with a Madra, for a Madra is dirt, and their word is worthless. I've seen your women, drunk with wine, strip off their clothes and dance wildly. Like donkeys, they piss while standing up. And you, the son of such a woman, wants to tell me about morals. Clearly you are planted by the enemy to distract me from my purpose, but there's nothing a little man like you can do to stop me. So shut your mouth, wise ass. I'll let you off with a warning this time, for my lord's sake, but if you keep talking like this to me, I'll knock you in the head with my club. Shalya said, I am a king from a long line of kings, so who are you to question my antecedents? Shalya then recounted a story of a wealthy Vaishya who had a pet crow. They fed this crow rich food and praised the bird as if he were king of the birds. One day, a flock of geese came flying by, and the crow challenged them, saying he could outfly them all. The geese laughed at the crow's empty boasting, but the crow insisted that he was their better. So the geese allowed this impudent crow to accompany them as they crossed the ocean on their long migration. They tolerated his boasts and insults until they were far from the sight of land. It was only then that the crow became too weary to fly any further, but there was nowhere to land. Only when the crow fell from the sky from fatigue did a goose take pity on him. He loaded the crow on his back and flew the exhausted bird back to land. Shalya continued, Just like that crow, the Kauravas have been feeding you leftovers, and it has puffed you up far beyond your station. Now you treat everyone, even your betters, with contempt. I suggest you quit your boasting, because soon no one will have any sympathy for your madness. Oddly, Karna chose this moment to make a confession. He told Shalya that he had obtained the Brahma weapon from Parasurama, but it had one defect. He said that in order to get this weapon, he had studied under Parasurama, pretending to be a Brahmin. Karna obtained the weapon he desired, but then disaster struck. One day, while Rama was sleeping with his head resting on Karna's lap, Indra took possession of a dreadful worm. As Rama slept, the worm burrowed itself painfully into Karna's thigh. Not wanting to disturb his guru, Karna held still and did not try stopping the worm. When Rama woke up, however, he noticed the injury and observed that no Brahmin could withstand such discomfort. Poor Karna had to confess to his guru that he was in fact a Sutta. Rama said that the Brahma weapon only works for Brahmins, and that it is not reliable for anyone else. Therefore, he said, this weapon shall fail you when you need it the most. Karna continued, but never mind that. This weapon will still do the trick. Besides, I will kill Arjun with my arrows alone, so there's nothing to worry about. They must have had quite a drive from base camp to the battlefield, but finally they drew near the battle lines. Duryodhana had heard enough of this pair's bickering, so he stepped in to put a stop to it. This must have reminded Karna of his exalted position, because he just laughed it off magnanimously, and then gave the order to attack the enemy. That's all for now. Next time, we'll get started with the action on day 17 of the war. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 78, A Counterfeit Curfuffle. Last time, Karna was made general of the Kaurava army, and served in that role for the 16th day of the battle. Despite his usual boasting, very little was accomplished that day. To explain why he had failed to live up to his promises, Karna complained that while he and Arjun were well matched, Arjun had the advantage because of his superior charioteer, Krishna that is. Duryodhana still had faith in his champion, so he sought out the best driver they had, who happened to be King Shalya of the Madras. If you recall, Shalya wasn't even supposed to be fighting on the Kaurava side. He had come out with his army to support the Pandavas, but was fooled into switching sides just before the war began. Shalya of the Madras was Madri's brother, thus the king was uncle to Nakul and Sahadev. Shalya felt bad for having to fight against his own nephews, but Yudhishthira gave him leave to do so. He did, however, foresee that eventually Shalya would be recruited as Karna's driver, so he requested that his good uncle do them the favor of stirring up trouble with Karna to help them throw him off his game. We saw the first fruits of that promise last time, as Shalya drove Karna out to the battlefield. The pair bickered like an old married couple the whole way out, until Duryodhana stepped in to make them cut it out. I find it strange that it was while hurling insults at one another, Karna finally decided to tell the story of how he studied with Rama Jamadagnya in the guise of a Brahmin. After all, this did not put Karna in a good light, and he revealed the fatal weakness in his command of the Brahma weapon. He had been given the weapon, but had also been cursed that it would fail him when he needed it the most. But at least we finally got to this story. There had been hints and references to this incident going back several books, and I began to wonder if they were ever going to reveal the details of that episode. And so it was that, on the morning of the 17th day of the war, Karna led the Kaurava army into battle, with Shalya as his driver. As they engaged with the enemy, Shalya warned Karna of Arjun's approach. He said, "Wow, look at Arjun over there, overwhelming his enemies. There's just a trail of decapitated bodies behind him. Those headless kings didn't even know what hit them. My God, he's just mowing down the elephants and men that tried to resist him. You better look out, because that guy is unstoppable." Karna ignored all of this, but he also did not go after Arjun. Instead, he attacked Yudhishthira. Fortunately, Bhima was nearby, so he attacked Karna's bodyguard as a sort of diversion. Bhima hit Karna with 73 arrows, and the 74th arrow removed the head of Karna's son, Bhanusena. But perhaps Yudhishthira did not need any help, because the Dharmaraja flared up and appeared to glow with a sacred fire as he sent a single arrow into Karna's left side. Karna lost his senses and fell to the floor of his chariot. It says Yudhishthira refrained from killing him on the spot because Karna's life belonged to Arjun alone. Karna soon recovered, however, and he directed his ire against some lesser opponents, killing numerous Panchalas. Yudhishthira soon returned, however, and the pair fought again for a while. This time, Karna managed to disarm the Pandava, and was soon in hot pursuit, about to capture Yudhishthira. It says that Karna purified himself by touching Yudhishthira on the shoulder, but then he recalled the promise he'd made to Kunti and let Yudhishthira go. Remember, he had promised his birth mother that he would only kill Arjun and would spare her other sons. Shalya didn't miss a beat, however. He laughed and said, "It's a good thing you didn't catch him, or you would have been roasted on the spot." Karna ignored him and taunted Yudhishthira instead. He said, "Run away, little boy. Go back to your mama and leave the fighting to real men. And tell her you're only alive because I let you go." Elsewhere, the fighting grew so fierce and the number of dead warriors so great that people witnessed a vast celestial army of Apsaras flying down to retrieve the souls of the dead warriors. The fighters on both sides paused momentarily to witness this amazing sight, but then, now confident of their place in heaven, they resumed fighting even harder than before. The blood of the dead and injured formed into rivulets and streams, making a river of blood that carried away the bodies and drowned some unlucky soldiers. Bhima had seen Yudhishthira's narrow escape, so he sent Satyaki and Drishtadyumna to protect his brother while he set out to kill Karna. Shalya noticed Bhima's advance and warned Karna, saying, "Oh crap, here comes Bhima and he looks really pissed off. I don't think I've ever seen him look this angry. He must be thinking of your disgraceful behavior at the dice game." Karna said, "Let him come. If he gets close enough, I'll kill him, and that will be sure to bring Arjun around so I can kill him too. Now keep your eyes on the road and take me to him." Things did not quite go as Karna planned, however. He started off well, disarming his opponent, but Bhim had plenty of spare weapons. He struck Bhim with a number of arrows, but Bhim returned just one well-directed shot, which knocked Karna to the floor unconscious. Perhaps also out of consideration for Arjun, Bhima did not follow through with the coup de grace. Instead, he left Karna there and turned to fight with others. When Sanjay described this incident to Dhritarashtra, the king said, "You know, my son told me again and again that Karna was the man who would kill all the Pandavas. How did my son react when he found out Bhima won so easily?" Sanjay said, "When he saw Karna lose face in that duel, he directed his brothers to ride out and rescue Karna. Duryodhana dispatched 20 of his remaining brothers to save Karna and defeat Bhima. He could not have sent a better gift to his cousin, however. Bhima happily killed the first 2 who came at him, and the other 18 turned tail and fled. Meanwhile, Arjun was tied up in a duel with Drona's son Ashwatthaman. The boy Brahmin performed pretty well. Even the celestial onlookers gathered around to admire the boy's attack. Arjun was also quite impressed, but Krishna, struck with one too many of the boy's arrows, got annoyed. He complained to Arjun, "What's going on here? You're letting him walk all over you. I know you're better than this. Stop admiring him and treating him as your guru's son, and do your job." Arjun had long ago stopped questioning Krishna's advice. He just stepped it up a bit, and soon had Ashwatthaman engulfed in deadly arrows. Badly wounded, Ashwatthaman was saved by his judicious charioteer, who drove him out of range before they both got killed. Seeing his best champions beaten back, Duryodhana tried to raise their spirits somewhat by declaring that soon the sacrifice would be over. They shall either win the earth and all its riches, or win paradise and immortality. Probably to save face a bit, Ashwatthaman turned his attention to Drishtadyumna. He recalled how his father had laid down his arms before the Panchala prince rudely beheaded him, and then he swore an oath. He said, "I shall not remove my armor until I have killed Drishtadyumna, and if I fail, may I never see paradise." Everyone cheered again, and they resumed the fight. Karna went after Yudhishthira and the twins, while Bhima fought with Duryodhana. Karna killed Yudhishthira's guard of 500 men and badly wounded the king. Nakul and Sahadev both rushed over to protect their brother, but even combined they could not stop Karna. He destroyed their chariots, forcing the three brothers to climb aboard one chariot. Karna pursued them, but Shalya objected. He said, "Why are you wasting time with these three? Arjun is waiting for you." Karna ignored him and continued to harry the three Pandavas. Shalya then said, "Look, over there, Bhima is kicking your master's butt. But if you hope to save your lord, you'd better help him out quick." Karna turned and noticed that Duryodhana indeed was rather hard-pressed by Bhima. So he broke off the chase and went to save his king. As for the brothers, Sahadev drove the other two back to camp, where Yudhishthira collapsed into a bed. It says that the shame of his defeat hurt more than the barbs removed from his body. Always in command, he ordered his brothers back to the battle to look after their brother Bhima. The scene then changes to a duel between Arjun and Ashwatthaman. As we've seen before, at first Drona's son pressed in with the advantage. He hit Krishna with lots of arrows, and everyone was much impressed. Then Arjun responded with explosive power, killing many bystanders, and cut away Ashwatthaman's horses from his chariot, forcing the boy Brahmin to scramble for cover. The defeat of Drona's sons sparked a panic among the Kauravas, and they began to flee. Karna turned things around by firing off whole clouds of missiles from his Vijaya bow. This sent the Pandavas fleeing back to their defenses. Arjun watched this and exclaimed, "Wow, Krishna, he's got quite a bow there. I don't see how we're going to deal with that." Krishna said, "Karna has badly injured your brother the king. Go to your brother now, and after that, you will kill Karna." This begins a new chapter called The Dispute of Arjun and Yudhishthira. And even before we get into it, I have to tell you that the whole chapter seems completely bogus to me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing my case because, frankly, this chapter doesn't deserve that much attention. I'll just say from the start that I think the whole thing feels contrived and the dialogue is totally out of character. You'll see what I mean as we get into it. The chapter begins with Arjun and Krishna's arrival back at the camp to check on the king's health. When Yudhishthira saw them coming, for some reason he assumed that they must have just come back from killing Karna. He didn't bother asking them if it were true or not. He just went into a long speech praising Arjun and denouncing Karna. Yudhishthira revealed that his defeat at Karna's hands had really bothered him. He said, "For the past 13 years I've been terrified of Karna. I could not sleep night or day out of fear for him. I am burning up with hatred for him. It seems everywhere I look I see Karna." He whined, "No one has ever treated me like this. I don't see a reason to go on living now that Karna has wounded me so badly." Yudhishthira then dredged up all of Karna's past misdeeds, using epithets such as wretched, malicious, evil, conceited, and Sutputra. He went on, "Did you kill that vile man, Duryodhana's boastful friend? Was it that evil man you killed? That fool Karna who constantly bragged, 'I'm going to kill Palguna'? Did you kill that charioteer's wrathful and stupid son?" I don't know about you, but I've never heard Yudhishthira speak like this about anyone, let alone his own half-brother. Arjun replied defensively, explaining all the great things he'd been doing all day, and he'd just not gotten around to killing Karna yet. But the day was still young. Uncharacteristically, Yudhishthira got really mad at Arjun. He said, "Our army is falling to pieces, boy. You got scared and abandoned your brothers to hide in the camp because you couldn't kill Karna. I remember you promised to kill him, and if you hadn't made that false promise, then maybe I would have made other plans about handling this war. Why did you lead us to this point if you're going to renege on your promise? We've made all our plans based on what you said you could and could not do, and now look at us. We're all screwed. Oh, Krishna, my life is ruined. If only Abhimanyu or Ghatotkacha were still around, they could have saved us. I know, why don't you hand over your Gandhava bow to Krishna? Let him be my champion, and you be the driver. I wish you weren't born, then we wouldn't be retreating from battle now. Damn you, damn your fancy bow, and damn your magic chariot." Sorry for the awful melodrama, but that's what it says. After hearing his brother's harsh words, Arjun angrily drew his sword. Krishna said, "Hold on there." Arjun hissed, "I made a secret vow to behead anyone who ordered me to give my bow to someone else. And that's what he just said. You heard him, so now I'm going to stick this king who relies on others to fight his battles. But don't worry, once I've killed him, I'll be fine." Noticing Krishna's disapproval, he said, "What do you think I should do?" Krishna's answer strikes me as rather uninspired. He said, "How can you kill your older brother as if he were some ordinary man? The killing of non-combatants, non-enemies, fleeing soldiers, someone who has surrendered, or someone who is distracted, these killings are not respected by good people. And all these apply to your good brother at the moment. You were just a dumb kid when you made that vow, and now you think it justifies killing your brother." I think what Krishna says next might provide a clue to the purpose of this strange encounter. He said, I will explain to you the secret teaching of Dharma, as Bhishma would teach it, or Yudhishthira, or Vidur, or Kunti. Krishna then gave a short lecture on truth-telling. Basically, he explained that being true to one's word is mostly better than lying, but there are occasions when it is better to forego a promise or an oath, such as Arjun's. Arjun was impressed. He said, Wow, you are so smart. I realize now that to kill him would be pointless. But still, I've got to do something about this oath. Tell me what to do. Krishna had just the trick for him. He said, Your brother only spoke to you like that in order to make you angry. He figured if you were extra angry, you'd have a better chance against Karna. Even so, your vow can be preserved. Your brother can meet death now while still remaining alive. You see, when someone deserving honor receives honor, he remains living in the world. But when he receives grave disrespect, he is said to be dead, though he still lives. So here's all you have to do. Just direct a little contempt at him. Just address him with the informal thou, and you'll kill him good enough. Arjun listened intently, thanked Krishna for his kind advice, and then yelled at his brother, using language that no one had ever dared utter to the Dharmaraja. He said, As for you, brother, hold your tongue. You have no right to criticize me while you are hiding in your tent. Only Bhim may scold me, because what he wants he takes himself. He does not depend on others to settle his conflicts. They say the power of Brahmins is in their words, and the Kshatriya's power is in their arms. But your words are powerful and cruel. Bhishma allowed us to kill him for your sake, and it was I who did the killing, again for your sake. I don't even think you should claim this kingdom, considering your gambling addiction. After casually throwing away our lands and titles at a dice game, you ask others to win it back for you. You know, our life has been constant misery since you took up dice playing, and now you berate me. It is because of you that so many warriors have been annihilated and lie dismembered on the field. The source of this disaster all lies with you, my lord, so don't try to provoke me with cruel and insulting words. After saying this to his older brother, Arjun again drew his sword. This time he intended to kill himself. Arjun lamented that now he had spoken so disrespectfully to Yudhishthira, he could not go on living. Krishna again intervened and said, Listen to me. If you kill yourself, you'll find a hell more terrible than if you had killed your brother. But just as you effectively killed your brother with your speech, you can effectively kill yourself. Just brag about your merits, and you'll have killed yourself. Arjun agreed to this, and made a brief speech about how great he was, and that he would kill Karna by the end of the day. He concluded, saying, Today either that Suta's mother shall lose your son, or Kunti will lose me. I shall not remove my armor until Karna is dead. He then knelt at his brother's feet and said, Please forgive me my harsh words. Yudhishthira then climbed from his bed and said, You should cut my head off right now. I should not have spoken to you like that. I am the ruin of our family. I am evil, simple-minded, cowardly, and disrespectful. You would be better off without me. Make Bhima your king. At this point, the scene is like a parody of the Mahabharata. As if the brothers were a pair of imbeciles, Krishna again intervened and re-explained the whole ridiculous scenario. He said that Arjun only said such cruel words as a way around his oath to kill whoever told him to give up his bow. And now everything was equalized, so they should just forgive and forget. The parody ended just as you'd expect. Both Arjun and Yudhishthira recognized the wisdom of Krishna's words, thanked him for his sage advice, and then they reconciled with each other, with Arjun again swearing that he'd kill Karna that very day. This ended a rather spurious chapter. I'm sure you'll agree with me that the whole encounter seems contrived and the arguments completely out of character. I suspect that this chapter was added to the epic a long time ago, but it just doesn't sound like something Vyasa himself would have written. I'm not aware of any other instance where Yudhishthira hurled such insults at anyone, nor is there any indication that he lived in constant fear of Karna until this very conversation. The brothers have always shown incredible solidarity through so much hardship that it's completely out of character that the most noble of the brothers would fall out over such a ridiculous misunderstanding. My guess is that this chapter was added for purely didactic purposes, long after the epic was composed. Here's my theory of how it got inserted into the epic. Imagine a time after the epic was written and had already become a source of wisdom to later Hindu princes. Judging from later Indian history, it would not have been uncommon for a king to have a younger brother who fought his wars for him. I imagine a scenario in which the younger brother had a falling out with his brother the prince, and probably justified it by some oath he'd made at one time or another. The courtiers would have been horrified at the prospect of a civil war or coup d'etat, so they went looking for a way to resolve this disagreement. Miraculously, they produced a chapter from the Mahabharata that addressed exactly that sort of problem, and they had no less an authority than Krishna to show them the way out. The biggest clue that this is a forgery is when Krishna claims that his teaching is endorsed by Bhishma, Vidur, Yudhishthira, and Kunti. Where else in the epic have we seen Krishna calling on the authority of others to make his point? It's never happened. I think our counterfeiters were gilding the lily, as it were, in case Krishna's word alone were insufficient to convince their masters. These supposed courtiers may have been well-meaning by inventing this little interlude, but they certainly were no Vyasa. They really failed to capture the real character of our heroes, and the result looks like a gross parody of the rest of the epic. Thankfully, things return to normal as Arjun returns to battle to finish off Karna. But first, Bhima has a score to settle with Dushasan. If hair and blood were major themes in Draupadi's humiliation, these themes will come back again as part of Draupadi's revenge. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 79, Down with Dushasan, Killing Karna. Last time, we got started with the fighting on the 17th day of the war. You might think we're nearly through, but day 17 is a really long day. Karna led the attack with his surly new driver, King Shalya, but so far he's avoided Arjun. Instead, he got in a tussle with Yudhishthira, and, if the last chapter is to be believed, he hurt the Pandavas' feelings more than he hurt his body. Yudhishthira was carried off to his tent to have his wounds treated. Meanwhile, Krishna suggested to Arjun that they first check on the king before they finish up with Karna. So the pair headed off to camp as well. As I pointed out last time, Yudhishthira behaved very strangely. He assumed that Karna had already been killed and did not bother to confirm his assumption. Instead, he went into a long diatribe about how much he hated and feared Karna. When Arjun admitted that Karna still lived, Yudhishthira perversely criticized and insulted his heroic brother. Even more strangely, Arjun responded to this by threatening to kill his own brother over an absurd oath he had supposedly sworn in secret a long time ago. Like a ridiculous parody of the rest of the epic, Krishna steps in with a workaround to killing the Dharmaraja. First, Arjun must insult his brother and then brag about himself. When this was done, the brothers kissed and made up, then both praised Krishna for his wisdom, and Arjun returned to the battle, more determined than ever to kill Karna. Well, we're done with that now, and the writing once again feels like the work of Vyasa. The next chapter is called The Slaying of Dushasan. The scene opens with a general melee, where the Srinjaya Uttamajas kills another of Karna's sons, named Sushena. Bhim then directed his driver to take him closer to the Dhritarashtra brothers so he could settle some more scores. Duryodhana observed Bhima's arrival and directed his followers to kill Bhim. It was his uncle Shakuni who led the attack on the Pandava. Shakuni attacked Bhima and managed to injure him, but Bhim countered ferociously and destroyed Shakuni's chariot, knocking him unconscious. Shakuni's easy defeat put the rest of his supporters to flight until even Duryodhana was caught up in the rout. The fleeing army ran to Karna for protection. Karna, meanwhile, was engaged with the Panchalas, of whom he killed many thousands. Bhima, as well as Nakul, Sahadev, and the Draupadeyas, tried to shore up their allies, but soon they were all caught up in a rout, and it was Karna who led the offensive. Now it was the Pandavas' turn to run away. Pressing their advantage, Duryodhana, Shakuni, Ashwatthaman, and Dushasan all joined with Karna in an attempt to make a final push to victory. Perhaps this was the point in which Arjun returned from camp, because only now does he enter the scene. Shalya was the first to notice his banner, and this time Karna did not mean to avoid his nemesis. He ordered Shalya to set a course for Arjun's chariot. He also ordered his followers to attack Bhima and Arjun to soften them up a bit. His warriors did as they were told, but death consumed them as soon as they drew near to Arjun. Among Arjun's attackers were 10 of Duryodhana's brothers. I had always expected that these guys were reserved for Bhima to kill, but not this time. Arjun fired 10 arrows, each of which beheaded one of his Kaurava cousins. Bhima probably didn't mind this very much, because he found himself engaged with even better quarry. Dushasan hurled himself at Bhima, and the two fought furiously. Bhima shot down his banner and beheaded his driver, but Dushasan got an arrow past his guard, and it struck Bhima in the torso, causing him to double over in pain. Dushasan followed that up with more arrows, further injuring the Pandava. But all this only served to make Bhima mad. He shouted, "Ow, that hurt! Today I shall drink your blood right here on the battlefield." Bhima then drew out a club that must have had an explosive in it, because he threw it at Dushasan, and it blew up his chariot and left him writhing on the ground, his clothing and armor in tatters. Bhima then leapt off his own chariot and stood over his crippled cousin. Recalling Dushasan's disgraceful behavior at the dice game, Bhima stood over his cousin and said, "Tell me, which hand did you use to pull the hair of the consecrated Queen Draupadi?" Dushasan smirked at that, as if recalling the incident with pride. He raised his hand and said, "This hand, which has squeezed thousands of swollen breasts, given away thousands of cows, and destroyed countless warriors, this is the hand that dragged the hair of Yajnasena's daughter, even as you looked on." That was enough for Bhima, who placed one foot on Dushasan's chest and ripped the arm away from his body and bludgeoned him to death with it. Bhima next cut off Dushasan's head and cut open his chest. Casting aside his sword, Bhima drank the warm blood with gusto. As he drank, he said, This is better than milk or honey, better than the sweet taste of the Amrit." Sanjay said that the onlookers were all horrified at the grisly spectacle, and many fled, sick with fear of Bhima. When Bhima finally tired of his vengeance, he looked up and saw Krishna and Arjun standing by. His arms and face smeared with blood, he grinned at his brother and said, "My vow to punish Dushasan has been fulfilled. Now I only have one more sacrificial victim. Once I have trodden on Duryodhana's head, then I shall find peace." Even as he was saying this, 10 of Dushasan's surviving brothers attempted to ambush Bhima, showering him with arrows. But Arjun was too quick for them, and, firing 10 arrows at once, each arrow took the life of one of Dhritarashtra's sons. Sanjay said that even Karna was unnerved by the horrid spectacle. Shalya noticed the despair of the Kauravas, and he thought of the most fitting words to say for that moment. Shalya said, "Don't despair, son of Radha. It is unbecoming of you. All of your allies and commanders are totally freaked out by Bhima, and Duryodhana is traumatized by the death of his brother. The Pandavas have completed one of their objectives, and now they are gunning for you. So remember your dharma as a Kshatriya, and face Dhananjaya like a man. In victory you shall have fame, and in defeat you shall have heaven. So now go get him." Actually, it was Karna's son, Vrishasena, who was the first to attack. Nakul stepped forward to meet him, so it appears the others stepped back to let the pair fight one-on-one. This time it was the Pandava Nakul who initially got the upper hand, injuring and disarming his opponent. But Vrishasena was no slouch. And let's face it, Nakul wasn't the greatest of Pandavas. And soon the boy disarmed and wounded Nakula. He also blew out the Pandava's chariot. Injured and disarmed, Nakul fled to his brothers. He urged Arjun to take the boy out. Vrishasena was not afraid of Arjun either. He happily sent some arrows flying at him and at Krishna. That was a bit foolhardy. Arjun announced, "Karna, they tell me you had a hand in the killing of my son, and so today I shall reciprocate by killing Vrishasena. Go ahead and try to stop me, and when I'm done with him, you'll be next. Then Bhima here will kill Duryodhana, and we'll finish this awful war." Calmly and steadily, Arjun knocked a few arrows to his bow and fired them off. One arrow took off Vrishasena's head, and 2 more took off his arms. Headless and armless, the grotesque figure of Karna's son toppled to the ground. Karna had witnessed the whole thing, and he furiously charged at Arjun. The long-awaited encounter had finally begun. Sanjay said that when Krishna saw his approach, he laughed and said, "Here comes Karna in his well-equipped chariot, led by white horses and driven by the king of the Madras. He is eager for the approval of his master. Now, may good fortune be yours, son of Pritha, and win victory today." Arjun replied, "Krishna, since you are content to drive my horses, my victory is certain, and unless I kill my enemy in battle, I shall not return. Today, it shall be either him or me. People will remember this battle for as long as the world exists." Sanjay said that in an instant, the fastest thought chariot of Pandu's son arrived before Karna's chariot. It looks like the contest had devolved into a kind of tournament, with the surviving warriors on both sides acting as the audience. The Kurus struck up their musical instruments and blew on conchas in support of Karna, while the Pandavas cheered on their hero. It says that all living things were gripped with uncertainty as to who would win when they saw these two heroes engage in battle. Even the celestial audience overhead were awestruck by the spectacle. Sanjay then framed the duel in terms of a new dice game. He said, "The Kauravas gathered behind Karna, while the Pandavas stood behind Arjun, because Karna was the Kauravas' throw of the dice, while Arjun was the Pandavas' throw. The onlookers were the judges and witnesses to the match, and, depending on this outcome, lay victory or defeat. It was an all-or-nothing stake. It seems that the whole universe embraced the dualism of this conflict. Most of the gods took Arjun's side, while the Danavas, snakes, and Rakshasas all took Karna's side. Karna's father, the sun god, and the sky goddess also cheered for Karna. Naturally, Mother Earth took Arjun's side. After all, Krishna is her champion in the cosmic struggle represented by this war. Also taking Arjun's side were all the sages and Gandharvas. All the Vaishyas, Shudras, and Suttas, and those of mixed caste, all took Karna's side, while the purebred Brahmins and Kshatriyas took to Arjun. Meanwhile, their respective fathers, Indra and Surya, like bellicose fathers at a kid's sporting match, began quarreling with each other over who had the better son. Finally, the grandfather of the gods, Brahma, stepped in to settle the matter. He declared, "Victory is certain for Arjun, for it was he who gratified Agni at the Khandava forest, and it was he who helped Indra with his enemies. Karna is on the side of the demons, so he should be defeated." Sanjay said, "Then began a terrible battle between the two as they vied with one another. Krishna pierced Shalya with his arrow-like glances, and likewise Shalya glared back at him. And as that chaotic and terrible battle unfolded, they each blanketed the other with dense waves of sharp, straight-flying arrows. Onlookers on both sides were struck by these ubiquitous arrows, but the Pandavas held their position and did not respond. The Kauravas, however, grew annoyed at being struck by Arjun's arrows, and a contingent of them broke away and attacked him. Arjun barely noticed them, however, and they were soon exterminated by him as if they were a mere afterthought. At the sight of this, Ashwatthaman spoke to Duryodhana. He said, "It is time you came to your senses. It isn't too late, so stop this quarrel and make peace with your cousins. You know that Yudhishthira is devoted to the welfare of all the people, and his brothers will obey him. So let there be peace between you, and you'll rule the world together. This is probably your last chance, so take my advice and end this now." Duryodhana listened and then replied, "It's exactly as you describe it, my friend. But still, now that Bhima has slaughtered my brothers, how can there be peace among us? And besides, neither you nor I can stop Karna now." By this point, the pair had resorted to magic weapons. Arjun summoned a fire missile, and Karna countered it with a water missile. The subsequent collision engulfed them both in a fog, which Arjun dispelled with a wind weapon. Arjun next produced Indra's own Vajra, or Thunderbolt, and Karna reciprocated with the Mahendra missile, which negated the Thunderbolt, and then followed up with the Bhargava missile, the blast of which wiped out thousands of Pandava onlookers. Bhima grew annoyed and scolded his brothers, saying, "How can you just stand there and watch as he slaughters so many good men? I've seen you fight Shiva himself, so how can this wretch survive even for a minute before you? This contest is getting tiresome, so either finish him off quick or let me do it for you." Krishna chimed in too, saying, "Remember who you are. You and I have been fighting the forces of evil for millennia, so let's wrap this up now." While all this ruckus was going on the surface of the earth, it awoke a sleeping demon down below. This demon was a serpent who had survived the great fire in the Khandava forest, and had ever since nursed a grudge against Arjun. This serpent, called Ashwasena, woke up and realized what was going on above ground. Using his yogic power, he entered one of Karna's arrows and charged it up with his hatred for the two Krishnas. Unwittingly, Karna selected that arrow for his next attack. The gods could see what had happened, and Indra suddenly despaired for Arjun's life. Shalya must have sensed something as well, because he cautioned Karna about taking aim. He said, "You should aim a little higher, or that arrow won't reach him." Karna said, "I never aim an arrow twice." Firing off the snake-headed arrow, he shouted, "Take that, Palguna!" The gods all gasped as this arrow made its way towards Arjun's exposed neck. But Krishna knew what was coming, and he pressed down on the chariot with his foot, forcing the horses to kneel while the vehicle sank down into the earth. By the time the arrow struck, Arjun had lost some elevation, and the missile struck his golden helmet, knocking it to the ground. Even this was no mean feat, since the helmet had belonged to Indra, and the ground shook as it struck the earth. Arjun thought nothing of it, however, and he just tied up his hair with a white cloth and resumed the fight. The snake wasn't done yet, however. He returned to Karna, hoping to re-enter Karna's quiver. Karna noticed him and asked what he wanted. The snake explained that he'd nearly killed Arjun, but for Karna's bad aim. Karna demurred, however, saying, "I don't need anyone's help in killing Arjun. Besides, I never fire the same arrow twice. Now step aside and let me kill him myself." The snake then decided to take matters into his own hands, and he flew at Arjun under his own power. Without thinking, Arjun sliced the snake into little pieces with his arrows. He asked Krishna, "What was that?" And Krishna explained how this snake was still mad about the Khandava fire. See episode 18. As he explained this, Krishna jumped down and pulled the chariot back up out of the ground. While Arjun waited to get moving, Karna struck him with 10 razor-headed arrows. Arjun replied with a single iron arrow, which cut right through Karna and sank into the earth on the other side. He followed that up with more arrows that struck off Karna's headdress, knocked off his earrings, and cut his armor to pieces. Arjun did not let up. He fired more arrows, wounding Karna all over, and finally striking him in the center of his chest. Sorely hurt, Karna became insensible. Dropping his bow and quiver, he tottered there in confusion. Too noble to kill a man in this predicament, Arjun relented, allowing Karna to recover his senses. But Krishna complained, "What's the holdup? Do him in now. The wise man strikes down his enemies, especially when they are incapacitated." Arjun said, "So be it," and proceeded to fire arrows into Karna's stunned and senseless body. Sanjay said, "With many arrows spearing his body, Karna was radiant, like a huge mountain bristling with pine trees. But then Karna snapped out of his stupor, retrieved his weapons, and began firing back. Finally, even fate got tired of this game, and as Karna raced by on his chariot, the earth herself suddenly opened up and swallowed his chariot wheel. Karna's chariot came to an abrupt halt. Shedding tears of frustration and anger, Karna hopped down to free up the wheel. All the while, he called out to Arjun, "Time out, Arjun. Hang on a second while I raise my wheel out of the ground. You are famously fair-minded, so you won't shoot me, will you? You know Dharma, so I'm sure you won't hit me while I'm down." Karna tugged at the wheel, but it would not budge. Straining with all his might, Karna lifted the whole earth a few inches higher, but still could not free the wheel. Meanwhile, Krishna took great exception to Karna's talk of Dharma. He said, "What's this? Suddenly you have an interest in Dharma? Dharma never came to mind when you and your pals dragged Draupadi into the hall. Where was your sense of Dharma when Shakuni cheated Yudhishthira at dice? And what of your Dharma when you did not hand over the kingdom after 13 years? What of your Dharma when you insulted Draupadi? Or when you allowed Abhimanyu to be ambushed and killed? The Pandavas know Dharma well, and it is by Dharma that they shall destroy their enemies." Imagine being schooled in Dharma by Krishna himself. Karna was deeply embarrassed, and he guiltily hung his head down. Krishna's speech also had a strong effect on Arjun. The reminder of Karna's past perfidy infuriated the Pandava to the point that fiery energy emanated from his eyes and ears. Drawing a particularly auspicious arrow, Arjun enchanted it with more mantras and then said, "As certainly as I have been true to my Dharma, may this arrow kill my gallant enemy Karna." Karna turned to his last defense, the Brahma weapon, but, as predicted, the mantra slipped from his mind. Sanjay said, "With that radiant arrow, whose brightness was like the sun and moon, Arjun, his bow drawn and body bristling, was eager to kill his enemy as he clung to the wheel. He unleashed the arrow, and it lit up the sky with its fiery radiance. Then Arjun severed his head, just as Indra severed Vitra's head with his thunderbolt. Karna's severed head tumbled to the ground like the sun falling from the sky. Then Karna's massive body collapsed with its wounds streaming blood. Once he'd fallen, a fiery energy spread out from Karna's body and entered the sky and sun. All the men and warriors watched that marvel after Karna was killed. While the Pandavas and their allies hooted and hollered in celebration, Shalya whipped his horses and fled the scene. As the afternoon sun settled in the west, Karna's body glowed like twilight in the long shadows. Bhima roared and danced a jig that made the earth shake, while many Kauravas broke away and began to flee. Duryodhana just sat down and wept. Pretty much everyone on the Kaurava side who had a chariot or elephant fled the field, leaving the Kaurava princes with about 20,000 foot soldiers. Shalya rode up to Duryodhana and said, "There has never been a battle such as there was today. Karna was truly unbeatable, but fate determined otherwise. So pull yourself together. Everything depends on fate, and you are not beaten yet." Duryodhana did just that. Drawing his sword, he mounted his chariot, driven by his own son, and rallied his remaining infantry to attack. It was pretty hopeless for these forlorn infantry. Bhima waded in among them and soon had all 20,000 of them exterminated. The few chariot warriors still in the fight, such as Kripa, Ashwatthaman, Shakuni, and Duryodhana, continued fighting until darkness finally settled in on the battlefield. The 17th day of the war had come to an end. Without discussion, the surviving Kauravas each went separately to his own tent for the night, unsure what fate awaited them on the next day. The Pandavas were jubilant. Yudhishthira toured the field in his own chariot, making sure that Karna was indeed dead, and then the whole camp gathered to celebrate. As for old Dhritarashtra, when Sanjay got to this point in the story, the old man fell into a dead faint. The women folk in the palace had gathered around for the news, and Gandhari also passed out. This ends the book, the Karna Parva. There's a final benediction at the very end of this book that says, "Whoever shall read or listen to this account of the great sacrifice of a battle between the heroes Dhananjaya and Karna shall reach all the worlds and attain happiness. Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva are well pleased with you. For a Brahmin, listening to this is as good as mastering the Vedas. For Kshatriyas, this will bring strength in battle and victory in war. Vaishyas will accrue great wealth by it, and all Shudras shall gain good health. Whether you fall into one of those categories or not, I wish you the best. Thanks for listening. This is the Mahabharata Podcast, episode 80, Shalya and the Dissolution of the Kauravas. Last time, we said goodbye to the boastful Karna. The death scene was quite compelling, almost as memorable as Bhishma's bed of arrows. That makes it confusing to me how jumbled the narrative of Karna's death turned out to be. The core story was rather difficult to extract from the presentation in the text. For instance, much was made of Karna's training under Rama Jamadagnya, but the story itself was only told at the last moment, and was presented as part of an argument Karna had with Shalya. We might have expected Rama's curse to play an important role in his death, but it wasn't really. The story of his death is actually told twice, and the failure of his Brahma weapon is only vaguely mentioned in one of them. There was a much more significant curse at play here that only gets briefly mentioned, and the story is never told. This has to do with the way the earth swallowed up Karna's chariot wheel. At a couple of points in the story, there's a brief mention of a Brahmin's curse. Later, the earth herself intervenes and swallows up one of Karna's chariot wheels. At least so far, we are not given any details about this Brahmin's curse, however. It looks like we must go beyond the text to find any details of this story. The legend of this curse holds that, sometime after his apprenticeship with Rama was over, Karna killed a cow by accident. The cow belonged to a Brahmin, who cursed him, saying that he too would die as defenseless as the cow had been. The text of the epic seems to expect us to have known this story already, but the story is never presented in the epic itself. It is interesting that Karna's sins included abusing a cow, abusing a woman, Draupadi that is, as well as abusing the earth herself. Remember that it was Mother Earth who begged the gods to save her from these demons incarnate. So it is interesting that when we get to the point in the war in which victory over the Kauravas hinged on the defeat of a single warrior, the earth takes matters into her own hands by grabbing hold of Karna's chariot and refusing to let go until Karna was dead. This is one of the most powerful scenes in the entire epic. Karna, whose life has been full of frustrations, finds that nature herself is turned against him. He appeals to Dharma, but Krishna takes even that away from him by advising Arjun to hit him when he was defenseless. The image is of him struggling alone with his chariot wheel, tears of rage and frustration streaming down his face as Arjun mercilessly beheads him with a single arrow. There's a fun blog called thekarna.wordpress.com which takes Karna's side in this conflict and argues that he was the real hero of the story. I do find the debate entertaining, but I hope Karna fans will forgive me if I seem to be partial to the Pandavas. The text states repeatedly, in the omniscient voice, that Karna really was a sinful man and the incarnation of a demonic asura. As far as this project is concerned, Vyasa's text must be taken on its own terms. So, if Vyasa says Karna was a bad guy, then I feel obliged to present him in that light. The same thing goes for how we might judge Arjun's role in Karna's death. People sympathetic to Karna often point out that he was killed unfairly, that Arjun had to cheat in order to win. The text makes a great effort in absolving Arjun of that sin. Throughout the course of the war, Arjun often showed a reluctance to do anything even remotely dishonorable. Krishna had to constantly scold him for holding back. By the 17th day, Arjun still showed some reluctance to strike a man when he was down. But by then, he had given up arguing with Krishna. So when Krishna ordered him to kill Karna, Arjun simply did what he was told. If you think that what he did was contrary to Dharma, then you must take it up with Krishna, not Arjun. And this isn't a simple matter of Nazis just following orders. After all, Krishna is God. He's the final arbiter of what constitutes Dharma and what does not. In terms of the text, when Krishna tells you to do something, you better just follow orders. To me, the most striking element of this scene is the image of Karna clinging to the wheel. We have seen the image of a wheel several times during this war. First, there's the wheel formation, which only Abhimanyu can enter. Then we see Abhimanyu armed only with the chariot wheel when he is killed. Finally, Karna is killed clinging to a wheel. And of course, Krishna's Sudarshana chakra is shaped like a wheel. These are powerful images, but I wonder what it means. The significance of the wheel is not spelled out in the story, but it brings to mind the medieval notion of the Wheel of Fortune, in which all mortals are doomed to rise and fall by circumstances beyond their control. In Hinduism, as far as I can tell, the wheel, or chakra, is usually associated with power, such as Krishna's disc weapon, the Sudarshana chakra. The Svetasvatara Upanishad describes all of creation as a wheel, while world emperors are called Chakravartis. Regardless of all that, Karna's death, like his life, was a tragedy. His whole existence was the product of an injustice, and his behaviors only compounded the injustices. And in the end, there was no way anyone could make up for it. He and all of his grievances were simply extinguished by Arjun's arrows. The next book, the ninth, is called the Shalya Parva. As each of the previous battle books has been named after the commander of that part of the war, you might expect that this one is named after Karna's charioteer Shalya, and that he shall be the next commander, for the 18th and final day of the war. Like each of the previous battle books, the Shalya Parva begins at the end, with Sanjay racing back to Hastinapur to report on the death of Shalya and the end of the war. Since this kind of spoils all the suspense, I'll skip over that part and just say that, after hearing the bad news of the day, Dhritarashtra again passed out and had to be revived by his loyal younger brother Vidur. When the old king recovered his wits, he again begged Sanjay to relate all the details of how the war finally came to an end. Sanjay began his retelling, starting at the death of Karna. He repeated the story of how the Kaurava army came unglued after the death of their commander, and how Duryodhana eventually rallied a small unit of infantry to continue the fight until nightfall. The following morning, the surviving nobility gathered to appoint a new commander. As he did before the election of Karna, Duryodhana deferred to Drona's son Ashwatthaman, asking his advice on who should next be elected commander. Ashwatthaman readily nominated King Shalya to be their general. This was seconded by the rest of his advisors, and Shalya was duly elected. If Shalya had any misgivings about this appointment, he did not mention it. Instead, he assured all those present that finally, after so many flawed generals, they had elected someone who was truly unbeatable. He declared himself the toughest guy who ever held a bow, and assured his master that victory was no longer in doubt. You would have thought by now that these boasts had worn a bit thin, but that was not the case. The Kauravas followed their new general into battle, feeling like the war was as good as won. Only Kripa felt otherwise, and he gave a long speech trying to convince Duryodhana that it was time that they gave up. After all of their sons and heirs had already been slain, so even their victory would be hollow, since there would be no one alive to inherit their spoils. Duryodhana heard him out respectfully, but could not agree. He recalled his past offenses against the Pandavas, and felt that these would never be forgiven. Besides, he said, Draupadi is at this very moment undergoing the most severe of austerities to ensure my destruction. She sleeps every night on the hard ground, and has sworn to continue doing so until we are defeated. Peace with them is impossible since the slaughter of Abhimanyu. And finally, after having ruled the earth as its sole monarch, how could I bear to walk behind Yudhishthira like one of his slaves? When news of Shalya's election reached the Pandava camp, Yudhishthira grew worried and asked Krishna what they should do next. Krishna was very reassuring. He said, "Look, you've already done the impossible by defeating those invincible warriors, Bhishma, Drona, and Karna. While Shalya is certainly a valiant warrior, he does not compare to them." Indeed, Krishna was so confident that he predicted that Yudhishthira would personally defeat the new Kaurava general. Thus, at daybreak on the 18th day of the war, the two sides, both much diminished in numbers, charged at each other, each side as confident of victory as they had ever been. While both sides had lost a good number of their most famous warriors, it seems their armies were still quite large. Sanjay said that the Kauravas still had 3 million infantry, 200,000 horse, 10,000 elephants, and 11,000 chariots. The Pandavas still had a smaller force, consisting of 1 million foot, 10,000 horse, 6,000 elephants, and 6,000 chariots. Among the skirmishes of that morning, we discover that Karna still had a surviving son in the fight named Chitrasena. Perhaps because Nakul had not fared so well against the father, he squared off with Karna's son, and eventually defeated him by lopping off Chitrasena's head. To avenge his death, 2 more sons of Karna appeared on the battlefield, named Satyasena and Sushena. Nakul threw a dart at Satyasena, which struck him in the heart, killing him instantly. Sushena responded by destroying Nakul's chariot. Draupadi's son, Suttasoma, raced over and gave him a lift, but Nakul wasn't done fighting. He shot a razor arrow at Karna's surviving son and removed Sushena's head from his body. This final extinction of Karna's dynasty brought despair to the Kauravas, but Shalya rallied them, and they held their ground. As they rallied, Shalya and his son fought with Sahadev. Shalya killed Sahadev's horses, but Sahadev killed Shalya's son. It seems that Shalya was not so much interested in revenge as in victory, because he did not go after his nephew. Instead, he went for Yudhishthira. The pair faced off for a while, but it appears that Yudhishthira could not take the heat. His brothers had to jump in and help out. While Duryodhana watched Shalya single-handedly take on Yudhishthira, Bhima, Nakul, Sahadev, Satyaki, and Drishtadyumna, he began to seriously believe that Shalya would beat them all. Yudhishthira, meanwhile, began to wonder how Krishna's prediction could possibly come true. But considering that just the day before Bhima had killed Dushasan and Arjun killed Karna, it really was time that he also did something heroic. So Yudhishthira summoned his brothers to form a guard around him, and in a battle formation, he led them to a final encounter with Shalya. While Yudhishthira resumed his duel with Shalya, Bhima fought Duryodhana, and the twins fought Shakuni. Ashwatthaman and Kripa kept Arjun occupied. Yudhishthira rose to the occasion, and now the onlookers considered the two well matched, and no one could tell who might win. The pair traded blow for blow, shooting out each other's bows and piercing each other with arrows, until Yudhishthira managed to destroy Shalya's chariot. Just then, Ashwatthaman raced over and provided Shalya with a replacement car. From his new chariot, Shalya returned the favor and shot Yudhishthira's horses and driver, depriving him of his own chariot. Luckily, Bhima was nearby, and he helped out by destroying Shalya's new wheels. Now both of the opponents were on foot. Picking up a sword and shield, Shalya charged at Yudhishthira, but as he ran, Bhima shot out his sword, shield, and armor. Despite this, Shalya continued to charge at his enemy. Yudhishthira seized his chance, drew out a dart, and threw it at Shalya with all his strength. Shalya reached out to catch the dart in mid-flight, but failed. The projectile went right through his chest and sank into the earth behind him. Then that mighty king of the Madras fell, arms outstretched to the earth, and the earth, like a dear wife advancing to welcome her lover, seemed to rise up to receive him affectionately. Sanjay put it this way: and then the powerful King Shalya, who had long enjoyed the earth like a dear wife, now seemed to sleep on the earth's breast, embracing her with his arms. Yudhishthira did not hesitate for a moment. He just turned to what was left of Shalya's entourage and began to slaughter them. They still remained 1,700 chariot warriors from the Lord of the Madras, and they only fought more desperately to avenge the death of their lord. By then, Arjun and Bhima had come forward to protect their brother, and they set to exterminating this remnant of Shalya's army. Duryodhana did not even try to exercise any sort of command over these warriors. He just flung himself at his foe with the courage born of desperation. Meanwhile, his sneaky uncle Shakuni led his remaining forces around to the rear of the Pandavas and attacked them where their defenses were weak. Sahadev and Drishtadyumna raced to the rear to stop him, but as soon as they got near, he ran away. Shakuni played this game with them several times before he finally withdrew his remnant of fighters and went in search of his nephew. Krishna, meanwhile, advised the Pandavas that the war had gone on long enough and it was time to wrap it up. And so, with Arjun leading the way, the Pandavas pressed in against the surviving enemies in a long front, rolling over their opponents like an avalanche. Kripa and Ashwatthaman struggled to keep up a rearguard defense when Shakuni rode up looking for Duryodhana. The three of them realized that none of them had seen him for quite a while. At this point, things got so bad that even Sanjay got caught up in the action. The whole divine sight premise went completely out the door when Sanjay said, "I myself, with just a few followers, became reckless of my life. A fierce battle took place between us and a division of Drishtadyumnas. We were soon vanquished by them and forced to retreat, but then Satyaki came rushing at us. Desirous of taking me alive, he cut off my armor and seized me while I lay unconscious on the ground." Elsewhere, the Pandavas continued to sweep all before them. Bhima killed so many elephants that their mountainous corpses piled up and became an obstacle to their forward progress. Bhima was forced briefly to put down his cudgel and drag away the elephants so his brothers could pass. Having still heard no news of their king, Kripa, Ashwatthaman, and Shakuni broke away to search for him. There were not many Kauravas left by this point to put up any resistance, but it turns out that Duryodhana still had some brothers left. I must confess that I have not been keeping a tally of how many have been killed so far, but I'd rather estimated that they'd all been wiped out by now. But now we find out that he still had at least 11 brothers left, and these guys made their last stand against the Pandavas. This was just fine by Bhima, who launched himself at them and killed them one by one. Following their deaths, Bhima went on to slaughter all the soldiers that had gathered with them. Sanjay said, "And then our army, which had lost a huge number of men, only consisted of very few survivors, and became exceedingly cheerless. Only now do we discover the whereabouts of Duryodhana. It looks like he'd taken shelter with his last surviving brother, Sudarsha, amongst a group of cavalry. Krishna was the first to spot him, and he urged Arjun to go straight at him and finish this war now. Arjun reassured his friend, saying, 'All but 2 of Dhritarashtra's sons have been slain, and these 2 shall meet destruction today as well. Bhishma has been slain, Drona has been slain, Karna, Shalya, and Jayadratha too. Shakuni is down to 500 horse and 200 chariots. Of elephants, only 100 remain, and there are only 3,000 foot soldiers. Of their leaders, there only remains Ashwatthaman, Kripa, Uluka, and Kritavarman, and that's it. Today, King Yudhishthira shall be freed from all his foes. None among them shall escape me. As the Pandavas approached, Duryodhana did not run away. They turned and fought. While Arjun busied himself with mopping up what was left of the Kauravas' allies, Bhima went after Duryodhana's brother, removing his head with a razor-sharp arrow. Sahadev, meanwhile, focused his attack on what was left of Shakuni's army. He got into a duel with Shakuni's son, Uluka, and cut off his head while he was charging at him. Sanjay said, beholding his son slain, Shakuni, his voice choked with tears, recalled the words Vidur had spoken. Having reflected for a moment, Shakuni heaved a sigh and attacked Sahadev, striking him with 3 arrows. Sahadev responded by shooting out Shakuni's bow. Drawing a sword, Shakuni threw it at the Pandava, but Sahadev shot it out of the air. Shakuni also threw his mace and a dart, but to no avail. Seeing all his soldiers running away, Shakuni decided to join them and turned and fled. But Sahadev wasn't giving up that easily. He recalled all the bad things that odious little gambler had done, and he chased after Shakuni, saying, remember your dharma and fight like a Kshatriya. Be a man and receive your reward for your treachery. Sahadev's arrows cut down Shakuni's banner and shattered his bow. Shakuni then spun around and charged his enemy with a lance. But Sahadev was too quick. He shattered the lance and then cut off Shakuni's head with an iron arrow. The Pandavas all cheered Sahadev, but Shakuni's followers pounced on him with renewed anger. But Arjuna and Bhima were there to help out, and the 3 brothers killed many of them. At first, Duryodhana tried again to rally his troops, but he looked around and didn't see many people left still alive. Sanjay says that this was the moment the Kauravas set his mind on retreating. With even his horse dead, Duryodhana, without a single companion, fled eastwards on foot. By this point, even the Pandavas were nearly wiped out. We are told that they numbered only 2,000 chariots, 700 elephants, 5,000 horse, and 10,000 foot. But even this tiny remnant vastly outnumbered the Kauravas' decimated force. Now that the fighting had necessarily died down, Drishtadyumna noticed that Satyaki still held Sanjay hostage. He laughed and said, "What's the value of keeping this one? He's not worth the ransom. Just kill him." Satyaki drew his sword, but Vyasa stepped in and forbade the charioteer's murder. Sanjay said, "Satyaki bowed to Krishna's request and set me free. Removing my armor and handing over my weapons, I set out on the evening road to the city, my limbs bathed in blood. After I'd walked about 2 miles, I found Duryodhana, standing alone, mace in hand, and exceedingly bloody. For a long while he did not notice me. And then he did not recognize me. Then I told him about my capture and release by Vyasa's mercy. When he regained his senses, he asked me about the other fighters and his brothers. I told him that his brothers had all been slain and our troops exterminated. Vyasa had told me that only 3 chariot warriors had survived on the Kaurava side. Heaving a deep sigh, the prince put his hand on my shoulder and said, "It looks like there's just the 2 of us left alive, while the allies of the Pandavas are all yet living. Go now and tell my father that his son has entered the depths of a lake. Having lost my sons and brothers, and my kingdom taken away, I shall rest at the bottom of this lake." Sanjay said that Duryodhana used a mantra to charm the waters of that lake, and make a breathable space for himself as he entered it. Shortly after he had disappeared beneath the water, the 3 survivors from the war rode up in their chariots. These were Kripa, Ashwatthaman, and Kritavarman. All 3 were horribly wounded and mangled from the battle. They recognized Sanjay and greeted him warmly, and then asked after Duryodhana. Sanjay pointed into the lake and then told them what happened. Ashwatthaman said, "If only he knew we were coming, we could have held together and kept up the fight." But it was too late now, so they loaded up Sanjay and together they rode to the Kauravas' camp. All that was left at the camp were old men and women, and when they learned of their defeat, they set off into the night to return to Hastinapur. The widowed womenfolk all wailed and untied their braids as they went. Sanjay said, "These women, who in their palaces had never been seen even by the sun, were now exposed to the gaze of the common people." But as news of their defeat spread, the commoners became afraid, and soon there was a general evacuation of the countryside for the walls of the capital. Aside from the submerged Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra had only one son left alive. It was Yuyutsu, the illegitimate son who had taken the Pandava's side. When he observed the fear and mourning among his brother's retainers and widows, he requested permission to aid these bereft kinfolk. Yudhishthira, of course, allowed him to go. Yuyutsu then supervised the retreat of the widows back to the capital. When he arrived at his father's city, Vidor greeted him, content that at least one of Dhritarashtra's sons had survived the Holocaust. Sanjay said, "As regards Yuyutsu, he passed the night in his own bed. Afflicted with sorrow, he took no joy in the congratulations he received from having survived the catastrophe. Instead, he passed the time thinking about the terrible destruction of his..." That's all for now. Next time, the Pandavas will find out the location of their submerged cousin and will spark off the final conflict. Thanks for listening.